Hello there, and welcome to All About Earth, where time stretches, science softens, and curiosity curls up beside you for the night. Go ahead, pull up your blanket, switch off the light, and let your imagination wander backward, not millions of light years into space, but just a couple of million years into Earth's own memory. We're heading to the Pleistocene epoch, a time between 2.5 million and 11,700 years ago, recent geologically speaking, but already half a dream away from us. The dinosaurs had long since vanished. The continents had roughly settled into their modern shapes. But Earth was far from quiet. It was an age ruled by giants, mammoths with towers of fur and sweeping tusks, saber-toothed cats with smiles no one wanted to see up close, ground sloths the size of elephants, and armored glyptodons rolling across South America like living tanks. From the tundras of Asia to the grasslands of North America, from Europe's icy forests to the ancient plains of Australia, these creatures reigned. Why so big? Well, part of the answer lies in the cold. The Pleistocene was a time of repeating ice ages, when glaciers waxed and waned like enormous breaths of the planet. In that chill, large bodies held heat better, like natural thermoses with fur, and so nature sculpted her inhabitants on a grand scale, creatures built not only to survive the frost, but to shape their ecosystems. They were, in a sense, engineers of their world, trampling forests into meadows, spreading seeds, moving nutrients, altering rivers simply by existing. Tonight, as you listen, imagine yourself standing there on a vast wind-bitten steppe under a pale winter sun. The horizon hums with movement. Herds of mammoths trudging in slow rhythm, their breath steaming like mist over the grass. A pack of dire wolves howls in the distance. The air smells of frost, earth, and ancient life. This was our world not so long before we arrived. Our ancestors were already out there, learning to tame fire, shape stone, and perhaps on cold nights watch those same mammoths and wonder what they meant. So before you drift off, take a moment to picture it. The lost world of ice and giants. If you enjoy these slow travels through deep time, you can share your thoughts below. Tell me what kind of creature you'd want to meet on that frozen plain. Tap like, subscribe, and let's keep wandering together through the forgotten chapters of Earth's story. Now get comfortable, we're about to step further into the age of giants, the quiet thunder of the Pleistocene. Gigantopithecus, the giant ape of Asia. If you listen closely enough, sometimes the forests of ancient Asia still seem to echo with the deep, muffled footfalls of something enormous. The bamboo sways, a shadow passes. For a moment you could almost believe that somewhere in that green maze, a shape as tall as a door and as wide as a refrigerator, was moving slowly, chewing thoughtfully on a stalk of bamboo. That would be Gigantopithecus, the great forgotten ape of the Pleistocene, a creature so big that even imagination has to take a deep breath before describing it. Picture it. An ape standing close to 3 meters tall, around 10 feet, and weighing as much as 500 kilograms, roughly half a ton. Think of a gorilla, then double it, maybe add a bit of bear. The result is something between a forest monk and a walking mountain. Gigantopithecus wasn't a monster, not by temperament anyway, but it was the undisputed heavyweight of its world. The largest primate ever known. The true giant of the family tree that also gave us orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and eventually ourselves. Its bones, what little we have, tell a story written in fragments. A few jaws, some teeth, scattered fossils discovered across southern China, Vietnam, and India. Teeth the size of golf balls, molars so massive they could crack bamboo like celery. From these clues, scientists have had to reconstruct a life that was both familiar and astonishing. Gigantopithecus likely lived in dense subtropical forests, places thick with vines, fig trees, and the gentle creak of bamboo in the wind. It wasn't built for running across open plains or swinging through trees like a gibbon. No, this was a creature of the understory, slow, deliberate, enormous, and completely at home among the shadows. If you imagine its daily life, it's almost peaceful. Dawn light filters through leaves, catching on fur that might have been reddish-brown like an orangutan's, or dark and glossy like a gorilla's. We don't know for sure. Gigantopithecus stirs, yawns, and reaches for breakfast. Its hand, the size of a dinner plate, grasps a stalk of bamboo and snaps it with a muffled crack. Chewing begins. Slow, methodical, with that deep jaw grinding fibrous plant matter. A forest breakfast for a forest giant, and it needed plenty of it. At that size, this ape likely spent most of its waking hours eating. Studies of its teeth suggest a diet dominated by bamboo, leaves, and fruits, with perhaps the occasional bit of root or seed. Its molars were broad and ridged, perfect for crushing cellulose, while its jaw was one of the most powerful ever found in a primate. Think of it as nature's slow-motion food process. If pandas are the gentle grazers of modern Asia, Gigantopithecus was their towering cousin. Less cuddly, perhaps, but every bit as specialized. What's funny is that such a colossal creature managed to live a life that was, in many ways, quiet and unassuming. It didn't hunt, it didn't roar, it didn't chase. It simply existed on scale, like a mountain that happened to be alive. Its main defense wasn't speed or cunning, but sheer size. Few predators, even the tigers and crocodiles of the time, would have dared to challenge an adult Gigantopithecus. Standing 3 meters tall, with arms that could likely uproot a small tree, it was a walking keep-out sign to the rest of the animal kingdom. And yet, despite that impressive bulk, there's a gentle humor to imagining this giant ape moving carefully through its forest. It couldn't climb trees easily. 3 meters of body and half a ton of weight don't exactly lend themselves to acrobatics. If it tried to swing from a branch, the forest would probably respond with a loud crack and a brief rain of leaves. So, Gigantopithecus stayed mostly grounded. It might have sat on its haunches beneath fruiting trees, waiting for a breeze or gravity to deliver a snack. In that sense, it lived patiently, an eater of whatever the forest offered. If you're picturing King Kong right now, take a breath. Gigantopithecus wasn't a rampaging skyscraper climber. It was probably shy. In fact, given the thick, tangled forests it lived in, it may have been rarely seen even by its fellow creatures. There's a certain poetic irony to that. The largest ape to ever live was also among the quietest. Its closest living relative today is the orangutan, and that connection makes sense. Both are built for strength over speed, both rely heavily on fruit and vegetation, and both have a calm, contemplative way about them. If apes can be said to have moods, you can imagine the two sharing some long-ago ancestor. One branch staying small and agile in the trees, the other growing enormous and rooted to the ground, like an echo of evolution's experiments in size. But size, as impressive as it seems, comes with a cost. The forest must provide enough food. The climate must stay stable enough for bamboo to thrive. The ecosystem must hold its balance. When the Pleistocene climate began to change, those balances started to unravel. Glacial cycles grew harsher, dry seasons longer, forests thinner. The dense canopies that once stretched across much of southern Asia began to fragment into open woodland and grassland. Bamboo, the staple of Gigantopithecus's diet, became patchy. You can almost feel the slow anxiety of that change. These giants wandering longer distances to find food, their numbers thinning, their home shrinking. A half-ton ape can survive many things, but not the disappearance of its dinner. When the forest retreated, Gigantopithecus retreated with them, step by slow step, until there was nowhere left to go. And so, about 300,000 years ago, the great ape of Asia disappeared. Extinction doesn't always come with drama. Sometimes it's just a quiet vanishing, a final generation failing to find enough to eat. There were no predators to blame, no battles lost, just the steady ticking of climate and time. The bamboo withered, and the giants went hungry. Still, for a while, they shared the world with early humans. That's one of those mind-bending facts that makes prehistory feel almost personal. Our ancestors, perhaps Homo erectus, might have glimpsed these towering apes at a distance, both species watching each other with cautious curiosity. Maybe the apes saw humans gathering fruit and thought small, strange cousins. Maybe the humans looked back and saw a living legend. It's even been suggested that the myths of giant forest spirits or wild men in parts of Asia could be faint cultural echoes of memories older than history itself. Scientists debate exactly how Gigantopithecus moved, whether it walked on all fours like a gorilla, or could at least occasionally stand upright. The consensus leans toward a quadrupedal gait, given its massive body and likely limited flexibility, but it's tempting to imagine that sometimes it did rise up, stretching its back, surveying the forest with a calm, heavy intelligence. What must that have looked like? A 3-meter tall ape silhouetted against the trees, framed by shafts of sunlight and drifting mist, a creature both familiar and utterly otherworldly. Its extinction leaves an odd emptiness in the imagination. We live in a world without giant apes, where the biggest primates are shy gorillas in shrinking forests. But in the grand sweep of Earth's story, Gigantopithecus reminds us that the primate family once experimented boldly, with size, with strength, with the sheer audacity of existing large. From a scientific perspective, Gigantopithecus teaches us about adaptation and vulnerability. It thrived for nearly 1 million years, perfectly suited to its niche, until that niche disappeared. Evolution doesn't grant permanence. What works beautifully for one era may fail completely in the next. The same size that protected Gigantopithecus from predators also made it slow to adapt. When change came, it couldn't shrink, couldn't diversify its diet, couldn't migrate fast enough. Its bigness, its triumph, became its But from a poetic perspective, one perhaps best appreciated in the quiet before sleep, Gigantopithecus feels like Earth's playful experiment in grandeur, as if the planet itself decided for a while to imagine what a mountain might look like if it chewed bamboo. There's something oddly comforting about that thought. The world has always had its giants, its wonders, its living metaphors for scale and patience. And though all we have now are a few scattered fossils, the imagination fills in the rest. A warm wind in the bamboo, a rustle of leaves, a sound like slow breathing. Somewhere deep in time, the great ape still moves, peaceful, powerful, enormous and gone. Gigantopithecus may be extinct, but its echo lives on in the orangutan's gentle gaze, in the forest's deep hush, in every story that begins with once. There was something bigger, and in a way that's how Earth remembers. Not in words or fossils alone, but in the quiet shapes of what comes after. So if you ever walk beneath tall bamboo and feel very small, take comfort. You're standing where giants once stood, where the forest itself once had to grow stronger just to hold their weight. And perhaps, if the wind is kind, it will whisper their name. Gigantopithecus, the giant ape of Asia, a gentle colossus, a vanished neighbor. And for a moment before sleep, you can almost hear it breathing. Terror birds, the predators of the southern plains. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in the open grasslands of ancient South America a few million years ago. The air is warm, shimmering slightly in the sun. Somewhere nearby, a small mammal is rustling in the dry grass. Alert, nervous, sniffing the wind. There's no roar, no growl, no hiss to warn it. Just silence. Then thunder. The ground trembles. Out of the haze, a shadow rushes forward at the speed of a motorbike. A blur of feathers, muscle, and precision. The last thing the little mammal sees is the flash of a giant curved beak, sharp as an axe, and aimed like a hammer of nature. That, dear listener, was Forestrattidae, which are the so-called terror birds, and the name fits like a scream in the dark. These creatures were the undisputed rulers of South America for tens of millions of years, long before lions, jaguars, or saber-toothed cats ever prowled its plains. Picture a bird. Yes, a real bird, but one that stood up to 3 meters tall, towering over you like an aggressive ostrich that had been secretly weightlifting for eons. Its head alone could be the size of a horse's skull, ending in a massive, hooked beak designed not for pecking seeds but for smashing skulls. If the earth ever had a phase where it whispered, "Let's make something that looks like a nightmare but runs on bird legs," this was it. The terror birds evolved in a South America that was still an island continent, cut off from the rest of the world by oceans and drifting land masses. For most of the Cenozoic era, mammals were busy elsewhere figuring out how to be predators. Wolves, cats, bears, but down south it was the birds that rose to fill the niche. The Forestrattids became what lions are to the savannah today. Fast, efficient, terrifying. Their anatomy tells the story beautifully. Start from the ground up. 2 long muscular legs, built for running, tipped with claws that could deliver kicks strong enough to break ribs. These birds weren't flightless because they were lazy. They were flightless because they had better things to do. Their wings had shrunk into stubby, useless flaps, good for balance, maybe intimidation, but not for soaring. All their evolutionary investment went into speed and stability. They could sprint up to 50 kilometers per hour, about the pace of a modern cheetah's warm-up jog. And unlike a cheetah, they didn't tire as quickly. Imagine being chased across an open plain by a 3-meter bird that could outrun you, outlast you, and didn't need claws or fangs to finish the job, just a head the size of an anvil, and a beak that worked like a guillotine. That beak is really where the magic or the horror happens. It curved down sharply, like a meat cleaver fused with a crowbar. When the terror bird struck, it didn't peck gently. It used the full momentum of its neck, swinging its head down like a pendulum to crush bones and pulp flesh. Some scientists think it hunted by stunning prey first, a quick, stunning blow, then gripping the limp body and tossing it into the air, snapping the neck or breaking the spine on the way down. Efficient, brutal, elegant in a way that only evolution could invent. Its eyes were forward-facing, an unusual trait for birds, and one that hints at something chillingly familiar. Binocular vision, the kind of depth perception you need when you're chasing something that's trying to get away. This wasn't a grazer, this was a strategist, a runner with purpose, an apex predator, wrapped in feathers. The largest of these species, Calenkin guillemai, discovered in Argentina, had a skull nearly a meter long. Try to picture that, a bird's head, the length of your arm, attached to a neck thick as your torso, sitting on legs taller than you. If dinosaurs were echoes of ancient thunder, terror birds were the aftershock, a reminder that extinction doesn't always erase the idea of giant killers. Sometimes evolution just hands the baton to the next best design. But for all their ferocity, terror birds were also deeply adapted to their landscape. They lived in open grasslands and sparse woodlands, environments that rewarded speed and sharp senses. South America at the time was teeming with prey. Small horses, rodents the size of dogs, and early armadillos clattering through the dust. There were few large mammalian predators to challenge them. The terror birds had inherited a continent, and they ruled it with feathers and fury. Now pause for a moment and imagine one of these birds mid-hunt. The sun low, shadows long, the scent of prey in the air. The bird crouches slightly, muscles coiled like springs, head tilted with eerie stillness. It can see the twitch of a tail in the grass. Then motion. The bird launches forward, each stride covering 4 meters, kicking up dust with a rhythmic thunder. It closes the gap in seconds. The prey dodges left. The bird pivots effortlessly, its long tail acting like a rudder. Then comes the strike, a downward swing, the heavy beak slamming into bone. A brief silence, a few feathers fluttering in the air, and the plains return to calm. It's tempting to call these birds monsters, but really they were specialists, products of an ecosystem that asked one simple question: how fast, how fierce, how feathered can evolution get? Their success lasted millions of years, from the smallest species about a meter tall, darting through brush like murderous turkeys, to the towering giants of the open plains. The pherecyds diversified into more than a dozen known types. Some had longer legs for pursuit, others, shorter and more robust, may have ambushed from cover. In every form, though, they shared that unmistakable design: long neck, massive head, and that cruel, elegant beak. And then, as it always does, the world changed. About 3 million years ago, a geological shuffle called the Great American Biotic Interchange took place. The Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, connecting North and South America for the first time in millions of years. Suddenly, a flood of northern animals poured south: wolves, big cats, bears, and the delicate balance of the southern ecosystem was shaken. The terror birds had never faced predators like these. Fast, pack-hunting mammals that could compete directly for the same prey and didn't mind stealing kills. Some smaller phorecyds migrated north, even reaching as far as modern-day Texas and Florida, but they couldn't hold their ground for long. The mammals had the advantage of endurance, sharper senses for smell, and perhaps a bit more teamwork. Evolution is fair, but ruthless, and in this new mixed continent, the age of feathered terror began to fade. Still, it didn't happen overnight. For hundreds of thousands of years, the terror birds clung on, adapting where they could. Some became smaller, quicker, maybe even scavengers. But the tides had turned, the forests thickened, the plains shifted, and the once dominant birds became rare sights. Eventually, around 2 million years ago, they disappeared entirely, the last echo of talons in the dust, the final shadow cast by a giant bird's stride. And yet, the legend remained. In a sense, they never left us. Every ostrich sprinting across the African plains, every cassowary glaring suspiciously in an Australian rainforest, carries a faint glimmer of that lineage. The same muscle, the same gait, the same hint of prehistoric menace hiding behind a bird's calm stare. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a modern flightless bird and thought, it looks like it knows something, you might not be wrong. Somewhere deep in that ancient DNA lies the memory of running, hunting, ruling. But don't worry, if you ever found yourself face to face with a terror bird, the best advice wouldn't be to fly away or climb a tree. Neither would help. You'd just have to run, fast. And even then, it might catch you. Because for all its feathery absurdity, this bird could sprint like a nightmare, hitting 50 kilometers an hour with those long, spring-loaded legs. To survive as long as it did, the terror bird had to be more than just fast. It had to be smart. Its keen eyesight and quick reflexes made it a master of the ambush. Its diet wasn't limited to one kind of prey. It adapted to whatever the ecosystem offered. It was, in every sense, a thinking predator. And there's something deeply fascinating about that. A bird that behaves like a cat, a feathered creature that became the top predator of an entire continent. Evolution, apparently, has a sense of humor. If you close your eyes now and listen, you can almost hear them again. The heavy thud of feet on dry soil, the rustle of feathers, the short echoing hiss of breath before the strike. The plains of South America once belonged to these running shadows, these avian hunters, whose very existence blurs the line between bird and beast. Their reign may have ended, but their story still runs through the veins of the earth. A reminder that power comes in many forms, and sometimes it wears feathers instead of fangs. The terror birds were proof that evolution's imagination is boundless, that when one branch of life falters, another can rise to fill the void in a form no one expects. 3 meters tall, half a ton of muscle and intent, beak gleaming like a polished blade, they ruled their world with a combination of speed, precision, and a dash of theatrical terror. You can almost picture the planet itself, whispering to its prey, "Run faster, little one, the bird is coming." And so the grasslands trembled, the small mammals darted, and the great feathered hunters of South America thundered across the horizon until time itself finally outran them. Even now, as you drift into sleep, the thought lingers, a shadow racing through deep time, a reminder that not all nights have teeth. Some of them have wings, or at least they used to. Megalania, the dragon of the southern continent. If you ever find yourself standing beneath the blazing sun of ancient Australia, a continent still half dreaming between myth and memory, you might feel the air tremble before you hear the sound. A low hiss, a shuffle through dry grass, the faint scent of dust and something reptilian. Then the shadow appears, long, sinuous, patient, not a crocodile, not quite a dragon, but something in between. Megalania, the great monitor lizard of the Ice Age, stretching over 7 meters long and weighing up to 600 kilograms, a reptile so massive it could have made a saltwater crocodile blink twice. This was no myth. Megalania, officially Varanus priscus, was the largest terrestrial lizard to ever walk the earth. To put that in perspective, imagine a Komodo dragon the size of a small bus, with jaws strong enough to crush bone and a bite that might have carried venom potent enough to drop a kangaroo in minutes. Australia, it seems, has always had a flair for dramatic wildlife, and Megalania was the ultimate example, part dragon, part tank, part nightmare. Scientists believe it stalked the Pleistocene landscapes of Australia, open woodlands, grasslands, and dry riverbeds, around 50,000 years ago, sharing its world with giant marsupials, flightless birds, and eventually the first humans. It was a continent of giants then, a place where wombats were the size of cars and kangaroos stood taller than basketball players. Yet, even among those prehistoric titans, Megalania was something different. It didn't graze, it didn't hop, it waited, it watched, it hunted. Its closest living relatives today are monitor lizards, including the Komodo dragon, which gives us a living blueprint for what Megalania might have been like. Only bigger, stronger, and probably meaner, like its smaller cousins. Megalania likely used a combination of ambush and endurance. It didn't need to chase down its prey, it simply had to strike once, deliver a deep bite, and then wait. Modern monitors carry venom glands that produce mild toxins, enough to lower blood pressure, thin the blood, and induce shock. Scale that up to a 7-meter predator, and you've got a bite that could turn even the largest marsupial into an exhausted, trembling meal within hours. In other words, Megalania was the slow assassin of the outback. It didn't roar or sprint, it prowled. You can picture it moving through the scrub, scales glinting in the sunlight, tongue flicking out to taste the air. It senses a wallaby nearby, perhaps a juvenile diprotodon, a creature the size of a small car grazing lazily. The lizard freezes, perfectly still, blending with the ground. Then a burst of motion, a surge of muscle and tail, and the jaws clamp down. The prey struggles, kicks, bleats, but it's too late. The venom seeps in, the pulse slows, and Megalania simply waits, patient as a shadow. Nature's oldest trick, perfect. Its sheer size must have made it nearly unstoppable. A 7-meter lizard is not subtle, but it didn't have to be. Few animals in that ecosystem could threaten it. Its armor of scales, heavy claws, and bone-crushing jaw made it a walking fortress, and like other monitors, it was likely an opportunist, feeding on carrion as readily as on live prey. If something was dying under the harsh Australian sun, Megalania would find it. In a land of scarcity, it paid to be flexible. Its tongue, forked and sensitive, flickered constantly, tasting chemical traces in the air, the way snakes do. It could follow a scent trail for kilometers, tracking the wounded, the sick, or the unlucky. Some paleontologists even suggest that Megalania's long tail, thick and muscular, was not just for balance, but for defense. A whip capable of breaking bones or deterring smaller scavengers. If it stood still, you might mistake it for a log. If it moved, you'd wish you hadn't noticed. There's something almost mythological about Megalania. In fact, some Aboriginal oral traditions speak of enormous reptilian beings that once roamed the land, spirits or monsters that could swallow a person whole. It's tempting to imagine that these stories, passed down for thousands of years, might carry distant memories of encounters between early humans and this colossal lizard. After all, when the first people arrived in Australia, Megalania was still alive. Picture it. Humans, small and quick, with spears and fire, sharing a landscape with a reptile longer than a car. Two species of hunters, both clever, both wary, circling each other in the same sun-baked wilderness. For a while they coexisted, humans at the top of their ingenuity, Megalania at the top of its size. But as with so many Ice Age giants, the balance was fragile. Climate changes began to dry out Australia even further. Grasslands expanded, forests shrank, and many large animals struggled to find food. For Megalania, that meant fewer big prey to ambush. And then there were those strange new bipeds, tool users, fire makers, persistent and unafraid. Humans didn't need to fight Megalania directly to end its reign. They only needed to do what humans do best: reshape ecosystems. As early Australians burned forests to manage land and hunted large herbivores, Megalania's food supply dwindled. Some may have been directly hunted, though the thought of facing a 7-meter venomous lizard with a wooden spear is enough to make anyone rethink heroism. But even without confrontation, Megalania was cornered by circumstance, a giant that relied on abundance in a land growing ever more barren. By around 40,000 years ago, it was gone, extinct. The last true land dragon, reduced to bones and whispers. The deserts and scrublands grew quiet again, though perhaps not entirely safe. Australia still had plenty of venom left to spare, but none of it would ever come packaged in something quite so colossal. It's strange, isn't it, to think that such a creature existed not in the time of dinosaurs, but alongside our own species, that there were humans alive when a venomous, 7-meter lizard roamed the earth. It bends the imagination, blurring the line between prehistory and myth. We often think of dragons as fantasy, but Megalania was as real as the sunrise. A dragon by any other name, one with muscle instead of magic, science instead of sorcery. Let's linger for a moment on its appearance. The head was long and triangular, with eyes that likely gleamed gold or amber. Its mouth, lined with serrated teeth, curved into something that could almost be mistaken for a grin of confidence, perhaps, or inevitability. The body, covered in tough, overlapping scales, shimmered between grey, brown, and olive tones, blending perfectly with dusty scrub. When it moved, it did so with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator that had never needed to run. Each step was a statement. This is my land. Its breath was probably heavy, hot, carrying the faint scent of decay from its last meal. The claws, thick, black, curved, were more for grip and tearing than climbing. It could dig, it could strike, and if it lashed out with its tail, it could knock a grown man to the ground. But what made it truly dangerous wasn't just strength, it was the combination of venom and patience. Megalania didn't need to win every fight, it just needed to bite one. You can almost imagine the scene near a prehistoric waterhole, a group of marsupials approaching to drink, cautious but thirsty. The sun beats down, everything is still, a log rests near the edge of the water, unmoving. Minutes pass. Then, in a heartbeat, the log explodes into motion. Dust and water erupt. The prey screams once, then silence. The ripples fade. Only the faint trail in the mud remains. Megalania, victorious again, slides back into the shade to digest in the heat. It's easy to romanticize creatures like this, to turn them into symbols of a wilder, older Earth. But in truth, Megalania was no villain or hero. It was just one more thread in nature's endless tapestry, woven for efficiency and undone by change. Still, if the planet had a sense of theatrical timing, Megalania would be one of its favorite acts. A final bow for the age of reptiles before mammals and humans took the stage. Even now, the fossils whisper of possibility. The bones suggest immense power. The tooth marks on ancient prey fossils tell of precision. And in the living Komodo dragon, we see a flicker of what once was a miniature echo of the monster that ruled before us. The modern monitor's flicking tongue, its stealth, its venom, all are revolutionary postcards from an ancestor that once cast much longer shadows. If you walked through the Australian bush today, you might catch that same eerie feeling, the sense of being watched. The air still hums with cicadas. The grass still rustles under unseen movement. You might tell yourself it's just the wind, or maybe a goanna, but deep down, some part of you might still imagine the shape of something larger, something that could be watching, waiting, tasting the air with a forked tongue, just as it did thousands of years ago. Of course, it isn't there anymore. At least, that's what science tells us. But the imagination is less strict. It likes to wonder. And when you look across the shimmering horizon of the Australian outback, the heat making the air dance, it's not hard to picture that long, dark silhouette gliding across the ridge, tail dragging, eyes gleaming. Megalania, the last great dragon of Earth. 7 meters of muscle, venom and quiet inevitability. Proof that nature doesn't need wings to make dragons. Sometimes all it takes is sunlight, dust, and a patient lizard with a very good bite. If you ever feel the ground tremble while walking alone in the outback, don't worry. It's probably just thunder, probably. But if you hear a slow hiss like the wind whispering your name, maybe step back. The earth has a long memory, and some shadows are slower to fade than others. Because somewhere, deep in the layers of time, the dragon still stirs, and it's smiling. Arctudus, the short-faced bear of the northern wilds. If you were to walk across the wind-swept plains of Ice Age North America, the kind of landscape where the air stings and the horizon feels endless, you might see something moving on the far ridge. At first, it looks like a trick of the light, just a boulder shifting in the sun, but then it stands up, taller, taller still, nearly 3.5 meters high, on its hind legs, towering over everything, fur rippling in the wind like smoke. That's not a boulder, that's Arctudus simus, the short-faced bear, the heavyweight champion of the Pleistocene, and one of the most formidable land predators to ever roam the northern hemisphere. Despite its name, there's nothing particularly short about Arctudus, except its snout. The rest of it was pure excess. When standing upright, it could reach 3.6 meters, about 12 feet, and weigh up to 1 metric ton. That's twice the size of the largest modern grizzly. Its limbs were long and powerful, built not just for brute strength, but for speed. And that face, broad and flattened, wasn't a flaw, it was a design. Wide nasal passages meant more oxygen intake, fueling a body that could run faster than most prey could imagine. Scientists estimate that Arctodus could sprint at speeds approaching 50 kilometers per hour, fast enough to chase down horses or pronghorns. Imagine a bear the size of a car running like a wolf, and you'll begin to grasp the unsettling efficiency of this creature. This was not the slow, lumbering forest bear we think of today. Arctodus was a creature of the open steppe, a predator perfectly tuned to the sprawling grasslands and frozen plains of Ice Age North America. Its long legs lifted it above the snowdrifts and tall grasses, and its keen sense of smell allowed it to detect carcasses from kilometers away. You could call it the bear that couldn't decide between being a sprinter or a scavenger, and so it became both. Picture the scene: a cold wind sweeping across the plains, herds of bison and camels grazing under the pale northern sun. A pack of dire wolves circles a downed mammoth, growling over the kill. Then, from the distance, comes the unmistakable silhouette of Arctodus. The wolves pause, they know that shape, that gait: shoulders like boulders, head low, legs like pillars. The wolves snarl, but their hearts are not in it. The bear doesn't need to growl. Its arrival is announcement enough. Within moments the pack melts away into the snow, and Arctodus takes over the feast. No hurry, no conflict, no drama. It simply walks in, claims the kill, and eats. That's the power of size. Some paleontologists think Arctodus was mostly a scavenger, using its speed to reach carcasses before other predators. Others argue that it was an active hunter, capable of taking down large prey on its own. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. Arctodus didn't need to specialize. It had the tools for both jobs: the nose of a vulture, the legs of a wolf, the strength of a bulldozer. It could run down what it wanted, or simply wait for others to do the work and then take over. In an ice age full of competitors, lions, wolves, saber-toothed cats, Arctodus was the ultimate opportunist. Its bite was no joke either. Short-faced or not, that skull was built for leverage. The jaw muscles attached high and deep, giving it a crushing force that could snap through bones like twigs. Fossil evidence shows that its teeth were large and sharp, designed not just for tearing meat, but for breaking open carcasses to get at the marrow, the calorie-rich treasure inside. And if you've ever seen a modern bear at a carcass, you know they don't eat delicately. Now scale that up to a 1-ton carnivore, and you've got a prehistoric cleanup crew that left nothing behind but polished bones. Its lifestyle must have been exhausting, though. To maintain that massive body, Arctodus would have needed tens of thousands of calories a day. A single kill might not even last it a week. That's probably why it ranged over vast territories, constantly moving, constantly searching. It was a nomad of the Ice Age, a giant with wanderlust, pacing the frozen highways from Alaska to the Great Plains. Some scientists even believe its long legs evolved, not just for speed but for efficiency, allowing it to cover incredible distances with surprisingly little effort. A bear built for marathon travel, sniffing the wind for the faint promise of decay. And yet, for all its size and strength, there's something oddly comical about the thought of it trotting across the tundra, massive head swinging, fur-matted, snorting with impatience at every carcass that turns out to be too old or too small. You can almost imagine the earth itself whispering, "Eat up, my friend. Winter's coming again." Arctodus lived during a time of abundance and peril. North America in the late Pleistocene was a wild place, cold, open, and full of opportunity. The megafauna were everywhere: mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and prehistoric horses. It was a buffet of protein and bone marrow, and Arctodus was built to take advantage. But the climate was fickle. Ice advanced, then retreated. Grasslands expanded, then vanished. The animals that Arctodus depended on began to disappear, one by one. And then came humans. The arrival of humans in North America, around 15,000 years ago, coincided with the beginning of the end for many large species. Whether by direct hunting or by competition for resources, humans changed the rules. Arctodus might have been faster than a man, but it wasn't faster than a spear or an organized group of hunters. Worse still, the new arrivals burned landscapes, redirected herds, and altered ecosystems in ways that even a one-ton bear couldn't adapt. Still, it's hard to imagine early humans encountering Arctodus without a sense of awe or terror. Picture a small band of hunters crouched around a campfire, the night cold and silent. Somewhere beyond the circle of light, something moves. A shape, faint at first, then closer, darker, taller, eyes catching the firelight, reflecting amber. The hunters freeze. They know that smell, musky, heavy, primal. The ground seems to breathe beneath their feet. They whisper a prayer, clutch their spears, and wait. The air holds its breath. Then just as suddenly the shadow turns, vanishing into the dark, with a sound like thunder fading into snow. For all its ferocity, Arctodus wasn't built for a changing world. As the Ice Age waned, forests began to spread where open plains once lay, the great herds dwindled, the carrion became scarce. Without vast grasslands and migrating prey, the short-faced bear lost its edge. It was too big, too hungry, too specialized for a landscape that was shrinking around it. Smaller bears, brown bears, black bears could adapt. Arctodus could. By about 11,000 years ago, it was gone. The Ice Age thawed, and with it went one of nature's grandest experiments in power and speed. The last of the short-faced bears lay down somewhere under the northern sky, and never rose again. But if you look closely at modern bears, you can still see echoes of its design. The confidence, the strength, the insatiable curiosity. Every time a grizzly stands up on its hind legs to sniff the air, it's like a ghostly echo of Arctodus, peering across a vanished plain. The genetics of that ancient power haven't vanished completely. They've just been softened by time. Scientists who study Arctodus still debate its personality. Was it a true predator, actively chasing and killing, or more of a scavenger? Stealing kills with that "I dare you to stop me" attitude. The answer may be both, and perhaps that's the charm of Arctodus. It wasn't bound by a single label. It was too big for categories, too adaptable for simplicity. It was the bear that said, "Why choose between hunting and scavenging when I can do?" Its short muzzle, which once puzzled researchers, may have been an adaptation for increased bite power, allowing it to crush bone more efficiently. Its long legs made it more cursorial, built for covering ground, unlike modern bears that shuffle or climb. In every feature, Arctodus was fine-tuned for domination. And yet, domination doesn't guarantee survival. When the Ice Age ended, the rules changed. The bear didn't. It's strange, isn't it? The same traits that made it magnificent. The height, the hunger, the need for open country became its undoing. Evolution doesn't play favorites. Even the mightiest creatures are just passing through here for a few million years, then gone. Still, the idea of Arctodus stirs something in us. Maybe it's the primal awe of seeing strength made real. Maybe it's the uneasy thought that we once shared the same horizon. Or maybe it's just admiration for an animal that could run like a wolf, eat like a lion, and loom like a myth. If you listen closely in certain parts of Alaska or the Yukon, where the land still holds fossils in frozen soil, you can almost hear it, the echo of heavy paws on snow, the panting breath of a giant bear moving with purpose. The tundra stretches wide, the wind moans through empty valleys, and for a heartbeat the Ice Age feels close again. Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, 3.5 meters tall, 1 ton of fur and fury, as fast as it was fearsome. The north was its kingdom, and strength was its crown. It's gone now, of course, but every time a modern bear stands, every time you catch that ancient glint in a predator's eye, you're seeing a flicker of it, the ghost of a time when the earth whispered to its giants, "Run faster, eat everything. The cold won't last forever." And somewhere, deep in that whisper, Arctodus still listens. Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat of the frozen plains. The wind cuts across a vast plain of yellowed grass and frost, the horizon stretching in every direction like an ocean of silence. A herd of young mammoths lumbers in the distance, their breath misting in the pale air. Beneath the cry of ravens and the crunch of frozen soil, another sound builds, steady, rhythmic, almost musical. Footsteps, many of them, the kind of sound that makes prey look up too late. From behind a ridge, the hunters appear sleek, low, moving in perfect sync. Not lions, not tigers, but something older, colder, more precise. Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, gliding through the ice age like a blade through snow. At first glance, Homotherium looks familiar. A big cat, roughly 3 meters long from nose to tail, muscled and sure-footed. But the longer you look, the stranger it gets. The head is flatter, the eyes higher, the front legs longer than the back, giving it a sloping, almost hyena-like profile. Its upper fangs, those famous scimitar teeth, curve forward like twin ivory sickles, each more than 10 centimeters long, not the oversized daggers of its cousin Smilodon, but thinner, sharper, honed for slicing through flesh rather than punching through bone. If Smilodon was a heavyweight brawler, Homotherium was a fencer, a master of movement and precision. It lived across a staggering range, from Africa to Europe, Asia to the Americas. A true world traveler of the Pleistocene, adapted to cold steppe and temperate plains alike. Scientists believe it thrived for over 4 million years, a remarkable run for a predator, before vanishing only about 12,000 years ago. Recent enough that early humans might have seen its eyes glinting in the firelight. But let's stay with it here in its prime, when the world was colder and the grass taller. Homotherium was built not for ambush in forests, but for endurance on open ground. It was the marathon runner of the cat world, lean, long-limbed, with lungs and a heart designed for long chases. You can almost picture it pacing a herd, waiting for weakness, its tawny coat rippling under sunlight filtered through frost. Where most cats today rely on explosive bursts of speed, Homotherium relied on persistence. It could run down prey over long distances, pushing it to exhaustion, then strike with surgical precision. Its prey of choice, juvenile mammoths, bison, horses, camels, whatever was large, nutritious, and a little too slow that day. But it didn't hunt alone. Fossil evidence suggests pack behavior, a shocking concept for cats. Their remains have been found in groups, near the bones of mammoths, with wear patterns on teeth, suggesting coordinated feeding. Imagine that, a team of saber-toothed hunters working like wolves, communicating in low growls and glances, knowing their place in the chase. One circles left, another drives the herd right. The leader bursts forward, muscles tense, breath steaming, the group moving like one organism with many claws. And when the moment came, Homotherium's anatomy did the rest. Those scimitar teeth, narrow and serrated, weren't for stabbing, they were for slicing, clean and efficient. They could shear through thick hide, carving meat in neat layers. The jaws, lighter than Smilodon's, traded brute force for finesse. Its bite wasn't a hammer, it was a knife. Its forelimbs, powerful and slightly bowed, could pin struggling prey while the cat delivered its fatal cuts to the throat or belly. You can almost imagine the sound, a low growl, a quick slice, silence. There's a kind of beauty in its design, a balance between strength and speed, savagery and grace. Homotherium didn't need to be the biggest or the strongest. It was a creature of timing, of discipline. Even its name comes from Greek roots meaning same beast, as if it were evolution's attempt to remix the cat into something halfway between ancient saber-tooths and modern lions. A transitional predator, bridging two worlds. Its face, despite those fearsome teeth, was oddly intelligent. The eyes faced forward, giving it excellent depth perception, and the brain case was large for a cat of its size. That suggests complex behavior, perhaps social interaction, coordination, or learning. It wasn't just a killer, it was a thinker. Picture a group of them watching a herd from a distance. Silent and calculating, tails twitching in unison, they didn't rush blindly into danger. They chose the moment. But as formidable as it was, Homotherium had its quirks. Those long front legs gave it an awkward gait, somewhere between a cat's prowl and a hyena's loping run. It probably couldn't leap like modern cats, or climb easily, too heavy in the chest, too specialized for the ground. If it missed a strike, it couldn't just scamper up a tree. It had to rely on open ground, endurance and teamwork. Its territory was the grassland, the endless plains where everything that lived either ran fast or died trying. Its scimitar teeth, though elegant, were fragile. They couldn't handle bone or gristle the way lion teeth do today. So Homotherium ate selectively, stripping flesh from carcasses with precision, leaving behind the tougher parts for vultures or hyenas. You could almost call it a picky eater, though. Refined carnivore might sound better. Imagine it finishing a hunt, stepping back from the meal with a faintly judgmental look at the scraps. Too much tendon. Next mammoth, please. Humor aside, this diet specialization may have contributed to its eventual downfall. As climates shifted near the end of the Ice Age, the great herds it relied on began to dwindle. Forest replaced grasslands, the open plains became fragmented, and Homotherium found itself in the wrong body for the new world. Built for speed and space, it couldn't thrive in dense woods or broken terrain. The prey got smaller, quicker, or simply moved away. It's easy to romanticize its extinction, to imagine the last of the scimitar cats stalking through melting snow, its reflection trembling in a puddle of thawed ice, unaware that it's the end of a lineage that stretched back millions of years. Maybe it still hunted then, thinner but determined, chasing reindeer or young mammoths under pale spring skies. Maybe a small pride survived for a while longer, hunting cautiously near human camps, their eyes catching the flicker of firelight in the night. And speaking of humans, yes, they were there. When Homotherium's numbers began to decline, Homo sapiens were spreading across the continents, armed with tools, strategies, and a tendency to outcompete everything they met. There's no proof that humans directly caused its extinction, but competition was inevitable. The same mammoths, bison, and horses that Homotherium chased were now being hunted by two-legged predators with spears and persistence. The overlap was fatal. A pack of scimitar cats might take down a mammoth calf once a week. Humans could plan, trap, and store meat. The balance of power shifted quietly, permanently. Still, if you look at Homotherium's fossil record, you get the sense that this was not a creature easily defeated. It lasted longer than many of its peers, outliving Smolodon in some regions, spreading wider, adapting longer. For millions of years, it ruled not through brute force but through efficiency. It was the cat that didn't need the jungle, the cat that learned to run like a wolf and think like a strategist. Its disappearance around 12,000 years ago marks one of those quiet moments when evolution closes a chapter without fanfare. No final roar, no grand extinction event, just a gradual fading as the plains turned to forest and the herds thinned. The Ice Age thawed, the world warmed, and the scimitar cats left behind only bones, teeth, and the faintest echo of footfalls across a frozen steppe. What a sight it must have been, though. A pride of Homotherium trotting over snow-dusted ground, the sun glinting off their golden coats, steam rising from their flanks. The lead cat stops, lifts its head, and scents the air. Somewhere ahead, a herd of musk oxen shifts nervously. The cats fan out, low and silent, their eyes bright with purpose. The wind carries their scent forward. The prey startles. The chase begins. Dust and snow rise. The ground trembles. Then stillness. The Ice Age rhythm continues. Hunt, feed, rest, repeat. If you could stand there, hidden in the tall grass, you might feel the weight of deep time pressing around you, the smell of iron and fur, the quiet satisfaction of predators who know their place in the grand design. These cats weren't monsters. They were balance incarnate, the sharpened edge of the ecosystem's blade. Even now, when you watch modern lions or cheetahs run, you're seeing a ghost of Homotherium's legacy. The same coiled power, the same instinct to pursue and to plan. But Homotherium's world was bigger, colder, harsher. It required more endurance, more coordination, more resilience. Every hunt was a gamble, every meal a victory against the endless winter. And maybe that's why, even extinct, it fascinates us still. It wasn't just a predator, it was a symbol of persistence, a creature that learned to thrive in an unforgiving age. While others hid or hibernated, it ran boldly across the tundra, scimitars flashing, breath steaming, life burning bright against the frost. So imagine for a moment that you're standing on that ancient plain. The wind hums low, the air smells of cold grass and distant rain, and then out of the mist they appear, a dozen golden forms moving in harmony, eyes fixed on the horizon. Tomotherium, the scimitar-toothed cats, runners of the endless steppe, masters of precision and patience. They pass by without sound, only a whisper of movement, and then they're gone, melting into the distance like ghosts of a colder, wilder earth. The kind of ghosts that remind you that life, no matter how fierce or fleeting, always runs its course until the grass grows back, the snow melts, and the wind carries their story to us. Homotherium, 3 meters of muscle, endurance and elegance, saber blades curved like poetry, hunters that ran marathons through the Ice Age, ruled by coordination and cunning, and vanished with dignity when their plains turned green again. You can almost hear the earth whispering their anthem. Run far. Slice clean. The world belongs to those who endure. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion of ancient Australia, deep in the ancient forests of Australia, under a canopy that dripped with dew and mystery, there once moved a creature unlike anything alive today. It padded silently over the leaf litter, its paws soft, its muscles coiled with purpose. In the moonlight it might have looked like a small lion, broad-shouldered, confident, eyes glinting gold, but if you looked closer you'd see the pouch. This was Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, a predator that walked the same red earth humans now call home, but belonged to another world entirely. It's strange to think that one of the most fearsome carnivores Australia ever produced was a member of the marsupial family, the same broader group that gave us kangaroos, wombats and koalas. But Australia, ever the eccentric continent, has a way of reinventing familiar ideas in odd, inventive ways. Thylacoleo was its idea of a lion, though one built from an entirely different blueprint. About 1.5 meters long, roughly the size of a small leopard, with powerful shoulders and muscular hind legs. It carried the ghost of a cat's shape, but the soul of something older, more experimental. And then there were the teeth. Oh, the teeth. Unlike the sharp canines of a lion or tiger, Thylacoleo's killing tools were its cheek teeth, massive, shearing blades evolved from the molars of its herbivorous ancestors. Nature, apparently, took one look at a plant-eating wombat's dentition and thought, you know what would make this fun? Scissors. Each tooth was shaped like a serrated guillotine, meeting its partner in a scissoring motion so efficient it could slice through flesh, tendon and bone with shocking ease. If you imagine 2 pairs of garden shears meeting in perfect sync, you're not far off. Its bite force for its size was the strongest of any known marsupial, stronger even than that of modern big cats. With a single clamp it could crush the skull of a wallaby or sever a limb in one motion. You could almost hear the earth itself whispering through the eucalypt leaves. Careful now, it bites. Its name, Thylacoleo carnifex, literally means pouch, lion executioner, and it wore the title well. Scientists estimate that it could weigh up to 130 kilograms, solid, compact, and powerful. It wasn't built for sprinting across open plains like a cheetah. It was a stalker, a climber, and perhaps even an ambusher. Its forelimbs were exceptionally strong, ending in retractable claws, the only marsupial ever known to have. Each claw was curved like a hook, perfect for climbing trees or gripping prey. Its thumb bore an oversized claw shaped like a dagger, capable of delivering deep, lethal slashes. If you were a prehistoric kangaroo wandering too close to the shadows, that thumb was the last thing you'd ever meet. And that's the thing about Thylacoleo. It wasn't just deadly, it was clever. The fossil record suggests it was a versatile predator, capable of living in dense forest, rocky outcrops, and open woodlands. It could climb trees to ambush from above, or lie in wait along trails and waterholes. Its tail, stiff and heavy, acted as a counterbalance, much like a kangaroo's, allowing it to pivot suddenly or even rear up while grappling prey. Imagine that, a predator capable of standing upright, gripping its victim with clawed hands, while slicing downward with teeth that worked like mechanical shears. Somewhere between cat, koala, and nightmare. And yet, for all its ferocity, there's something almost comedic about it too, a kind of evolutionary improvisation. Australia, isolated from the rest of the world for tens of millions of years, didn't have true placental predators like lions or wolves. So it made do. It took the descendants of tree-dwelling marsupials and turned one into a meat-eating machine. What's this? Nature might have said, holding up a herbivore's molar. Let's sharpen that. The result was Thylacoleo, a carnivore born from a family of grazers, a hunter with the soul of a wombat and the jaw of a buzzsaw. Its world was rich and strange. During the late Pleistocene, when Thylacoleo prowled the continent, Australia teemed with megafauna. Giant kangaroos taller than a man, marsupial tapirs, enormous wombats called diprotodons, flightless birds that could crush skulls with a kick. In that ecosystem, Thylacoleo was near the top. It didn't need to fear much, except perhaps each other, or later the strange tool-bearing bipeds who would eventually arrive on the scene. Its hunting style must have been intimate, almost surgical. It probably didn't chase. It stalked. It crept silently until close enough to strike, then lunged forward in a blur of motion, claws first, jaws second. The bite would come quick and final. Unlike lions, which suffocate their prey, Thylacoleo seems to have relied on its teeth to sever arteries or crush skulls. Imagine those bladed molars closing on flesh, one smooth motion, efficient and horrifying. The sound might have been something like tearing wet cloth. Its face, reconstructed from skulls found in caves across Australia, carries an expression of perpetual determination. The short snout and broad skull give it an almost comically grumpy look, like a cat perpetually judging you for existing. But behind that frown lay an engineering marvel. Jaw muscles so strong they wrapped high over its head and deep into the skull, maximizing leverage. You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that expression. And speaking of caves, Thylacoleo loved them. Many fossils have been found deep in limestone caverns, suggesting it used caves as dens, perhaps raising young there, or dragging prey inside to eat in peace. Some skeletons are found alongside the bones of giant kangaroos and diprotodons, evidence of feasts long past. You can almost imagine the scene: flickering torchlight, the echo of claws on stone, and the soft sound of bone being crushed by jaws designed for the task. For thousands of years, Thylacoleo ruled this ancient Australia, unseen by any eyes we could call human. But then, around 50,000 years ago, people arrived. They brought fire, tools, and a knack for changing ecosystems faster than evolution could adapt. For a while, humans and Thylacoleo may have shared the same land, their paths crossing in wary glances under the stars. Perhaps humans heard its growls at night, or saw claw marks on trees and realized they weren't alone in the dark. Maybe they told stories around campfires about the creature that could climb like a cat and bite like a crocodile. Eventually, though, the balance shifted. The great megafauna began to vanish, burned out by climate change, hunting, and altered habitats. The prey that sustained Thylacoleo grew scarce, and when food disappears, even the most powerful hunters fade. By around 40,000 years ago, the marsupial lion was gone. No grand battle, no cataclysm, just the quiet erosion of opportunity, until the last Thylacoleo lay down somewhere in the dry grass, its bones cooling in the shadow of a world that had moved on. It's strange to think of such a predator going extinct, not because it was weak, but because it was too well designed for a world that no longer existed. Every adaptation that once made it unstoppable, its precision, its power, its specialization, became a trap when the rules changed. Evolution, for all its brilliance, has no sympathy. And yet, Thylacoleo refuses to stay gone in the imagination. It has that quality of myth, part science, part shadow. Some explorers in the 19th century even claimed to have seen strange lion-like tracks in the Australian bush. And rumours still persist of mysterious marsupial cats glimpsed in the wild. Probably folklore, probably wishful thinking, but perhaps it's not entirely unreasonable that Australia, a place that still hides crocodiles the size of cars and spiders the size of your hand, could keep a secret at last. Even in death, Thylacoleo keeps its secrets. For decades, scientists puzzled over its family tree. How could a carnivore evolve from a line of leaf eaters? Why such unusual teeth? Why retractable claws in a marsupial, bit by bit? Answers emerged. Marsupials are nothing if not flexible. Given isolation and time, they reinvent themselves in surprising ways. Thylacoleo, it turns out, was evolution's masterpiece of improvisation. A predator that broke all the usual rules and still came out terrifyingly effective. If you were to reconstruct it today, standing there under the silver light of an outback moon, it would be a sight to remember. About the size of a leopard, but stockier, more muscular. A thick tail dragging lightly in the dirt, eyes reflecting green in the dark, its fur probably tawny or striped, perfect camouflage against bark and sand. It moves slowly, silently. Then, with the faintest shift of its weight, it springs, a flash of claws, a blur of motion, and then silence again. The forest returns to stillness, as if nothing happened. But somewhere in the shadows, a predator dines with perfect satisfaction. You can almost imagine it cleaning its paws afterward, meticulous, unhurried, like a cat after a successful hunt. There's humor in that image. A lion that carried its young in a pouch, purring softly over a meal it just disassembled with teeth that used to grind plants millions of years ago. Evolution, it seems, has a wicked sense of irony. Today, Australia feels quieter without it. The forests are full of smaller predators, quolls, feral cats, dingoes, but none have quite the same presence. None have that peculiar blend of grace and danger that Thylacoleo embodied. It was the last of its kind, the final chapter of a marsupial experiment that stretched back through time, proof that even on the edges of the world, life can find new ways to surprise us. If you ever walk through the eucalyptus forests at dusk, when the air smells of resin and heat, and the cicadas are falling silent, you might feel something, a weight in the stillness, a sense of being watched. Perhaps it's imagination, or perhaps it's the ghost of Thylacoleo, crouched in the undergrowth, patient as always. And if the earth still dreams, maybe it dreams of this creature. The lion that wasn't a lion, the herbivore turned hunter, the marsupial that defied its own design. A beast of paradoxes, graceful yet brutal, familiar yet alien. Its story reminds us that nature doesn't repeat itself. It experiments, and sometimes the results are terrifyingly beautiful. Thylacoleo carnifex, the pouch lion executioner. 1.5 meters of muscle, claws and scissor-like teeth. The strongest bite of any marsupial to ever live. A predator that ruled a continent alone and vanished not with a roar but with a whisper. If you listen carefully in the rustle of the gum leaves and the sigh of the warm wind, you might still hear that whisper. Bite hard, climb high. The night still belongs to you. Elasmothurium, the Siberian unicorn. Across the icy steppes of prehistoric Siberia, where the wind howls like a memory and snow stretches endlessly under a silver sky, there once thundered a creature that could have stepped straight out of legend. It wasn't born of myth or imagination. It was bone, muscle, and grit. 5 tons of it, galloping through frost and fog. Its name was Elasmothurium, but to those who might have glimpsed it through the haze of time, it would have looked like nothing less than a unicorn. The Siberian unicorn, a colossal rhinoceros with a horn as long as a man is tall, glinting like a spear in the weak winter light. It's strange to think that something so mythic actually existed. A real unicorn, though not the dainty, sparkly kind that prances through fairy tales. No, this was a brute of a beast, more bolder than beauty. 5 meters long, 2 meters tall at the shoulder, and weighing up to 5 tons. Its horn alone could stretch nearly 1 meter, a dense column of keratin that grew from its forehead like the world's most formidable accessory. If a horse's elegance and grace, Elasmothurium was power and persistence, built to survive where even the cold gave up trying. Imagine it now, the Pleistocene steppe, bitter wind carving dunes of snow, the ground crunching beneath hooves that sound like distant thunder, the air smells of frozen grass and mammoth musk. And there, moving across the plain, a shadow enormous and deliberate, the unicorn of the north. Its body was wrapped in thick fur, perhaps dark brown or soot grey, insulated against the Siberian chill. Beneath that shaggy coat, rippled muscles built for endurance, for constant motion across the treeless expanses of the Ice Age. It wasn't a lazy grazer like its modern cousins. It was a traveller, an athlete of the tundra, capable of running at surprising speed when danger approached. Some scientists believe it could reach speeds close to that of a galloping horse, an astonishing feat for an animal, the weight of a truck. And what a sight that must have been. 5 tons of rhino charging over the steppe, horn lowered, snow spraying from its hooves like waves from a ship's bow. You can almost hear the earth whisper to the wolves and saber-toothed cats that prowled nearby. Best not chase that one. That horn, its signature, its mystery, was more than just decoration. It was a tool, a weapon, a symbol of survival. For years, paleontologists argued about its true purpose. Was it used for fighting rivals during mating season, like modern rhinos, for digging through snow and ice to reach buried grasses, for defense against predators? The likely answer, all of the above. In the harsh Pleistocene, versatility was everything. The horn, shaped like an immense cone rising from its forehead, could gouge, shovel, and impale with equal effectiveness. Picture a wolf or early human hunter daring to approach one swing of that massive head, and the air would split with the sound of wood snapping, bone breaking, and a quick reconsideration of life choices. And yet, despite its fearsome armament, Elasmotherium wasn't a violent creature by nature. It was a grazer, a dedicated eater of tough steppe grasses that most animals couldn't stomach. Its wide, sloped head and long, strong lips suggest it fed low to the ground, sweeping its muzzle like a vacuum across the frostbitten plains. Its teeth, large and ridged, were built to grind through fibrous plants, not flesh. You could say it lived by patience rather than power, though it always kept a weapon handy, just in case. There's something oddly majestic about that image. A massive, solitary herbivore trudging through a frozen world, horn glinting in the dim light, searching endlessly for the next patch of grass beneath the snow. It lived where few dared. It survived through strength, endurance, and a kind of stubborn dignity. It didn't need to roar or chase or hide. It simply existed, a moving monument to the tenacity of life itself. Scientists have unearthed its remains across Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe, finding bones thick as logs and skulls with that unmistakable single horn base. The evidence paints a portrait of a creature perfectly adapted to the cold steppe ecosystems of the late Pleistocene, where mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinos roamed. But even among those giants, Elasmotherium stood apart, literally a loner. It likely lived in small groups or alone, following the grasses across hundreds of kilometers as seasons shifted. Its eyesight was decent, but its sense of smell was extraordinary. A nose shaped like a radar dish, picking up the faintest scent of vegetation beneath the ice. Its ears could swivel to catch the crack of predators stalking nearby, and though it looked slow, its reflexes were sharp enough to send even a hungry pack of Ice Age wolves scattering if they got too close. For all its size, it was agile, able to turn, charge, or flee when it needed to. Evolution, in its quiet brilliance, had built it for survival through millennia of frost and famine. And yet, despite everything, the great unicorn of Siberia couldn't outrun time. Around 39,000 years ago, the climate began to shift once more. The Ice Age deepened, temperatures plummeted, and the vast grasslands that sustained Elasmotherium began to fade beneath spreading snow and ice. The tundra transformed into desert in some regions, forests in others, neither offering the endless carpets of grass that these creatures depended on. With less to eat, their numbers dwindled. The herds, if they ever gathered in herds at all, grew thin and scattered. Imagine the last of them, trudging through waist-deep snow under a pale winter sky. Its horn still gleams, though cracked and scarred from years of use. The wind moans across the steppe, and the world feels too quiet. There's no herd nearby, no scent of others, only the whisper of its breath, rising in small clouds that freeze instantly. It stops, lowers its great head, and digs at the snow for grass that isn't there. The horn scrapes the ice with a dry hiss. Nothing. The air tastes of emptiness. Extinction is rarely sudden. It's a slow fading, a candle guttering in a wind that doesn't even notice. And so, one by one, the Elasmotherium vanished, leaving behind nothing but bones, a few teeth, and the faint suggestion that maybe, just maybe, humanity once saw them alive. That's where the myths begin. Because even though they're gone, the stories remain. Legends of giant one-horned beasts that roamed the cold plains of the north have been whispered for centuries. Tales that may have begun with ancient humans who saw the real thing. It's entirely possible that early people encountered Elasmotherium in their final days, when humans were spreading into Eurasia. Perhaps they saw one on the horizon, that massive horn catching the sun, and the memory passed down through generations as the story of the unicorn, a creature so strange and so powerful it couldn't possibly be real. And yet it was. You can almost imagine the scene. A band of hunters huddled around a fire, describing what they'd seen that morning. A beast taller than any man, a single horn rising from its head, moving with the grace of a dream and the strength of a storm. Over time, the story softened. The harshness of survival turned into wonder, and the unicorn of myth was born from the shadow of a very real rhino. From a scientific point of view, Elasmotherium was part of a long lineage of prehistoric rhinoceroses, distant cousins of the woolly rhino. But where others adapted to browse shrubs or live in smaller territories, this one went all in on open grasslands. Its skeleton tells a story of specialization: long, sturdy limbs for running, an arched back for flexibility, and that enormous nasal cavity proof of the horn that defined its face. Unlike modern rhinos, its horn sat not on the snout, but higher up on the forehead, giving it that distinct unicorn silhouette. It was evolution showing off a little, sculpting something both practical and poetic. And what a paradox it was, both majestic and ridiculous. Its horn, while deadly, was also heavy, perhaps weighing more than 20 kilograms. Imagine carrying that around all day while trudging through the snow, trying to eat grass through a frozen beard of icicles. You'd think it might have complained if it could. Maybe it did, in its own deep, rumbling way. Why did evolution give me a lance when I just want salad? Still, for tens of thousands of years, it worked. It thrived. The horn was not just a weapon, but a declaration. I am here, I am vast, and I am not to be trifled with. Even predators like wolves or hyenas would have thought twice before taking a chance. The image of Elasmotherium galloping across the steppe has a strange poetry to it. A 5-ton animal running with the speed and freedom of a horse, its horn slicing through the air like a frozen flame. In that sense, it's easy to see why humanity remembered it not as a rhino but as a symbol, a creature of strength, purity, and persistence. It was, after all, one of Earth's final great megafaunal marvels before the curtain fell on the Ice Age. When we think of unicorns today, we imagine magic and light. But Elasmotherium reminds us that even the most mystical ideas often have roots in the tangible, the real, the dirt and frost of this very planet. It was a unicorn that bled, that grazed, that ran, that fell. A unicorn made not of silver and dreams, but of sweat and survival. And perhaps that's even more beautiful. If you were to stand where they once walked, somewhere along the windswept plains of Siberia, where the snow drifts high and the air hums with silence, you might feel it. The ground beneath your feet, remember. The earth holds echoes of heavy steps, of horns scraping ice, of breath steaming in the dawn. You might close your eyes and hear it, a distant thundering, faint but steady, fading into the horizon. Elasmotherium, the unicorn that was real. 5 tons of fur and bone and quiet power. A creature that outran predators, defied the cold, and carried a legend on its brow. In the end, it vanished not in battle or fire, but in silence, done in by the slow turning of the planet's weather, by the shifting breath of time itself. But if myths have any truth in them, maybe the unicorn never really died. Maybe it simply changed shape, became story instead of flesh, memory instead of muscle. And so the next time someone speaks of unicorns, of impossible creatures with shining horns and ancient grace, remember that once, in the frozen heart of Siberia, there was such a thing. It grazed the frosted grass, it ran with the wind, and it lived by the whisper of the earth, saying, "Run fast, eat what you can. The cold will not last forever." And in that whisper, the unicorn still gallops. Megatherium, the giant ground sloth of South America. If you had wandered through the wild plains and humid forests of South America around 15,000 years ago, you might have thought you'd stumbled into a world built on exaggeration. Everything was oversized. armadillos as big as cars, vultures with wings wider than your living room, and lumbering in the distance, something that at first glance looked like a mountain slowly learning to walk. Its head rises, its back straightens, and you realize that the hill is alive. Standing upright on its hind legs, it towers 6 meters tall, fur glinting in the sunlight, claws curving like scythes. This is Megatherium americanum, the giant ground sloth, one of the most extraordinary creatures to ever grace the continent, a living paradox, gentle in soul, terrifying in scale. To call Megatherium a sloth feels like a cosmic joke. The word conjures an image of a sleepy, tree-hugging creature moving at the speed of spilled honey. But this sloth was a titan, a 4-ton herbivore, more than twice the weight of an elephant seal, and nearly as tall as a giraffe when standing upright. Its body was covered in coarse dark fur that hung in heavy waves, its limbs thick and muscular, its claws as long as kitchen knives. Slow? Yes. Harmless? Absolutely not. Imagine the sound it made when it moved, deep, deliberate footfalls that shook the ground like distant thunder. Its front claws, massive and hooked, weren't made for climbing trees like its tiny modern relatives. They were tools of power. Megatherium used them to pull down branches, uproot shrubs, and even topple small trees. Picture it standing on its hind legs, balancing effortlessly with the help of a thick, muscular tail that acted as a third leg, reaching up to strip entire trees bare. With one slow motion, it could drag down a trunk, then spend hours munching the leaves with a set of molars designed for grinding rather than cutting. Its face, by contrast, was almost kind, small eyes, a short snout, and a calm expression that made it look perpetually unbothered by the chaos of the ice age around it. You can almost imagine Megatherium chewing thoughtfully as the world froze and thawed around it, content with its simple mission: eat as much greenery as possible, then take a long nap. And yet, behind that calm demeanor was quiet strength. Scientists estimate that its forelimbs alone could exert more force than any mammal alive today. When it reared up, it could deliver a blow strong enough to shatter bone. Its claws, up to 30 centimeters long, could strip bark, dig roots, or fend off predators with terrifying ease. There's a certain irony in calling it a sloth. Megatherium wasn't lazy, it was deliberate, like a slow-moving tank built by evolution to flatten anything in its path. Its size was both its greatest gift and its most dangerous gamble. In the lush Pleistocene ecosystems of South America, being enormous meant safety. Few predators dared attack something that could turn and crush them with a single swipe. The saber-toothed cats and prehistoric wolves of the continent likely thought twice before approaching a full-grown Megatherium. But that bulk came at a cost. It required mountains of food. Every day, Megatherium had to consume enormous quantities of leaves, shoots, and fruit. Its slow metabolism helped, but still, survival meant constant eating. Picture it lumbering across the pampas, leaving behind trails of stripped vegetation, a living pruning machine reshaping its environment as it went. In many ways, Megatherium was an ecosystem engineer, an architect of the landscape. By knocking down trees and clearing paths through dense forests, it created open areas where sunlight could reach the ground, encouraging new plant growth. Smaller animals followed its trails, feeding on the young shoots that sprouted in its wake. Where Megatherium walked, the earth rearranged itself. Its anatomy was a marvel of evolutionary compromise. Its pelvis and legs were built to support immense weight. Its tail, thick as a pillar, anchored it when standing upright. Its arms, long and curved, gave it reach and leverage. Its skull, small in proportion to its body, held a surprisingly delicate set of cheek teeth, flat surfaces perfect for grinding fibrous plant matter. Unlike elephants or rhinos, Megatherium didn't have tusks or horns. Its defense lay in sheer size and attitude. You could almost imagine it giving an annoyed huff when a predator approached, like a bouncer tired of troublemakers. Really? You want to try this? The Pleistocene landscape it inhabited was alive with giants. Herds of glyptodons, armored mammals, the size of cars, trundled past. Toxodons, strange barrel-bodied grazers, wallowed near rivers. Mammoths roamed further north. But among them all, Megatherium stood apart. It didn't just graze, it dominated. It could pull down food sources other herbivores couldn't reach, giving it an evolutionary advantage. In a sense, it was a walking ladder, an herbivore that had solved the eternal problem of how to get the good stuff by simply standing taller than everyone else. And it wasn't alone. Fossil evidence suggests there were smaller species of ground sloths, some the size of dogs, others like bears, scattered across the Americas. But Megatherium was the undisputed monarch of the family, a sloth king ruling with patience, claws, and digestive efficiency. Its range stretched across much of South America, from the open pampas of Argentina to the forests of Brazil. It thrived in a variety of habitats, adaptable, persistent, and utterly unhurried. It didn't care about predators, didn't care about the cold. Its thick fur and bulk kept it warm. Its slow metabolism made hunger a gentle hum rather than an urgent cry. You get the sense that Megatherium didn't experience stress the way modern animals do. The Ice Age could come and go, and it would simply adjust, chewing a little more thoughtfully, moving a little further south. But there was one species it wasn't prepared for. Humans arrived in South America about 14,000 years ago, bringing something new to the continent: intelligence wrapped in persistence. Small, fast, organized, and armed with weapons that didn't require claws or fangs, they began to spread across the land. To them, Megatherium must have seemed like the ultimate prize, a lumbering mountain of meat and hide, slow and predictable. You can almost picture the first hunters catching sight of one, whispering in disbelief, "How do we even miss?" But Megatherium was no easy kill. Its height meant it could spot danger from afar, and its reach made it dangerous at close range. A spear could pierce its hide, yes, but a single swipe of its claws could turn a hunter into a red smear in the grass. The battle between humans and the giant sloth must have been an extraordinary dance of courage and caution. Perhaps hunters used fire or strategy, waiting until one was weak or trapped near water. Over generations, they learned how to bring down giants. And as humans multiplied, the giants began to vanish. Climate change played its part too. As the Ice Age ended, the great southern plains dried, forests shifted, and the lush greenery that had fed Megatherium for millennia began to retreat. Combined with hunting pressure, the population collapsed. By around 10,000 years ago, the last of the giant sloths had disappeared, leaving behind only bones, footprints, and an almost comic irony: the slowest extinction imaginable for one of the slowest creatures to ever live. It's a bittersweet thought. Megatherium didn't go out with a fight, but with a sigh. Perhaps the last one died quietly, leaning against a tree it could no longer topple, the wind brushing its fur, the world growing still. In that moment, a lineage that had survived for tens of millions of years finally let go. And yet, even in fossils, it still commands awe. Its skeleton looks like something out of myth. The enormous rib cage, the towering limbs, the curved claws. To stand beside a reconstructed Megatherium in a museum is to feel small in a way that humbles you. You realize that Earth once made creatures so strange and grand, they barely fit in imagination. There's humor in it too. Despite its frightening claws and colossal size, Megatherium was at heart a vegetarian, the deadliest-looking herbivore evolution ever devised. If you met it today, it wouldn't roar or chase. It would probably look at you with mild curiosity, then go back to eating leaves. A 4-ton gentle giant who could destroy you by accident, but probably wouldn't bother. You can almost hear it saying, in some slow, gravelly inner voice, "Relax, I'm just here for the salad." Its legacy lives on in its tiny modern relatives, the tree sloths of Central and South America. They are the shrunken descendants of giants, the echo of an age when slow didn't mean weak. Watching a modern sloth inch its way along a branch, you can't help but imagine the ghost of Megatherium behind it, moving through ancient forests at the same unhurried pace, but on a scale the world will never see again. The idea of the giant ground sloth captures something about the rhythm of life on this planet, that sometimes power doesn't roar, it moves slowly, methodically, confident in its mass and patience. In a world obsessed with speed, Megatherium reminds us that survival can also belong to the slow, the steady, and the stubborn. If you close your eyes, you can almost bring it back, the sound of cracking branches as it moves, the deep rumble of breath in the humid air, the glint of sunlight on its claws, and the earth whispering, in its timeless way, "Eat slow, live long, the forest is yours." Megatherium, 6 meters tall, 4 tons of muscle and fur, claws like excavators, and the calm soul of a creature that knew no hurry. A gentle titan of the southern world, extinct but not forgotten, because in every rustle of leaves and every unhurried moment, you can still feel its echo, the giant that pulled down trees just to have lunch and carried the spirit of patience through the ages. Glyptodon, the armored giant of the southern plains. On the ancient plains of South America, when the air still shimmered with the last breath of the Ice Age and herds of giant creatures moved like living continents across the land, there rolled a creature so odd, so perfectly designed for endurance, that it looked less like an animal and more like an invention of the earth itself. It wasn't fast, it wasn't fierce, but it was magnificent, a moving fortress of bone and hide, calm, deliberate, unbothered by the chaos of predators and time. This was Glyptodon, the giant armored mammal of the Pleistocene, the living embodiment of the phrase, "slow and steady survives." At first glance, you might think of it as a prehistoric armadillo on a heroic scale, and you'd be right in part. But Glyptodon was no skittering, nervous creature hiding under logs. It was a 3-meter-long, 1.5-ton tank of biology, wrapped in a dome of bone plates that fit together like a mosaic of natural armor. Its shell alone could weigh 0.5 ton, thick enough to shrug off the bite of a saber-toothed cat or the claws of a bear. Beneath it lumbered a body built for patience, a low, rounded shape with short, sturdy legs, and a calm demeanor that said in essence, "I dare you." It's hard not to smile at the thought of such a creature. Glyptodon looked like something a child might draw after seeing both a tortoise and a tank, and thinking, what if I combine them? And yet, nature had already done exactly that. Its name, derived from Greek, means carved tooth, a nod to the deep grooves of its molars, which it used to grind tough grasses and plants. It was a grazer, a slow-moving lawn-mower of the ancient pampas, content to spend its days eating and occasionally turning its massive, clubbed tail toward trouble. Ah, the tail. If the armor wasn't impressive enough, Glyptodon's tail was a masterpiece of prehistoric weaponry, long, muscular, and encased in a sheath of bony rings that ended in a spiked club. Imagine a baseball bat made of bone, wielded by a creature that didn't care much for running away. When threatened, it could swing that tail with the force of a wrecking ball, enough to crack a predator's skull or shatter ribs. Some species even had spikes or ridges at the tip, turning it into a mace straight out of a knight's armory. It's poetic, in a way, an animal that moved at a snail's pace, but carried a medieval flail wherever it went. But Glyptodon wasn't a warrior by nature. It was a survivor. For millions of years, it grazed peacefully across South America's open plains and river valleys, feeding on coarse vegetation that most animals ignored. Its heavy, turtle-like head and strong jaws allowed it to crop grass close to the ground. It wasn't picky. Anything green that grew near the soil line was fair game. Its world was a landscape of open skies, rustling grass, and distant thunder, the kind made by herds of other megafauna moving across the land. From a distance you might have mistaken Glyptodon for a boulder, until it shifted and the sunlight glinted off the mosaic of its shell. Each plate of bone, called an osteoderm, was patterned like a honeycomb, forming a dome so strong it could withstand the crush of a lion-sized bite. Even its tail was armored, every inch built for endurance. If predators had their claws and teeth, Glyptodon had patience and protection. Its closest modern relatives are the armadillos, those curious little insect-eating mammals that still scurry through South American forests today. But while armadillos roll up like soft, flexible footballs, Glyptodon didn't need to. Its armor was so heavy and complete that curling into a ball was impossible. It didn't hide, it endured. If a predator approached, Glyptodon simply lowered its head, dug in its stubby feet, and became the least appetizing meal in the entire ecosystem. It's easy to picture one standing in the middle of a plain, completely motionless, as a hungry saber-tooth circled it in frustration, looking for a weak point. Maybe the cat tried a few swipes, got nowhere, then received a sudden reminder of its own mortality. When the tail came swinging, you can almost hear the thud. The cat limps away, And Glyptodon, unbothered, goes back to eating grass. Life for Glyptodon was slow, predictable, and effective. It didn't need to change much. Its design worked, and so it thrived across vast stretches of time and geography, living from the lowlands of Argentina to the grasslands that once bridged South and North America. When the continents connected during the Great American Biotic Interchange around 3 million years ago, Glyptodons and their relatives migrated north, spreading into what is now Mexico and parts of the southern United States. They shared their world with mammoths, giant ground sloths, and enormous predators, but their armor gave them a kind of quiet confidence. It's funny to think about the personality of such a creature. In the theatre of the Ice Age, with all its dramatic battles and roaring carnivores, Glyptodon was the silent observer. It didn't chase, it didn't flee, it simply existed, methodically, peacefully, doing what it did best, eating and not dying. If you could step into that world and watch one graze, you might find yourself oddly soothed. Its movements would be slow and deliberate, its eyes half-lidded with what could only be described as contentment. A 5,000-kilogram meditation on endurance. But while Glyptodon's armor was its greatest strength, it was also its heaviest burden. The massive shell limited its agility and made it clumsy over rough terrain. Crossing rivers was risky. Some fossils suggest that individuals may have drowned when their armor dragged them under. It also trapped heat, making life in warmer climates difficult. The Ice Age suited it well. The cold plains and dry grasslands were its paradise. But when the world began to warm, paradise changed. Around 10,000 years ago, the climate shifted, the Ice Age receded, and new competitors arrived, humans. For early people in South America, Glyptodon must have seemed like a miracle of opportunity. Here was a slow-moving creature the size of a car, wrapped in a shell that could be repurposed as a shelter, and filled with hundreds of kilograms of meat. Fossil evidence suggests that humans did indeed hunt Glyptodon, perhaps using fire or coordinate attacks with spears. Some archaeologists even believe ancient people used empty Glyptodon shells as makeshift huts, natural domes of bone against the wind and rain. You can almost imagine a family huddled inside one on a cold night, firelight flickering across the inner curve of the shell, while outside, the world of giants faded quietly away. It's almost tragic. The creature that survived saber-tooths and shifting climates couldn't withstand cleverness and teamwork. Its defensive strategy, stoicism, worked against teeth, but not against tools. Unlike predators, humans didn't give up when the tail swung. They adapted, planned, returned with better strategies. In the end, the balance tipped. One by one, the great armored giants disappeared, joining the long list of megafauna that succumbed to the twin pressures of changing weather and human expansion. By around 9,000 years ago, Glyptodon was gone. The plains that once trembled under its heavy footsteps were quiet. Only fragments of its shell remained, buried in the earth, stone-like, heavy, patterned with the geometry of vanished strength. And yet, it's not hard to imagine them alive again. Picture a group of Glyptodons grazing by a river at dusk, their massive shells reflecting the last orange light of the sun. The air hums with insects, the ground vibrates with the weight of their movement. One lifts its head, sniffing the breeze. The tail shifts lazily, dust rising in a soft cloud. Everything about them says endurance, an unhurried confidence that no rush, no panic, no predator can touch. There's humor in their design too, if you think about it. Evolution in its playful mood created an animal that looked perpetually overdressed for danger. It's as if the universe decided that the best defense was not speed or aggression, but simply showing up to life in full armor. You can almost imagine a young Glyptodon asking the Earth, "Do I really need all this?" And the Earth replying, "Trust me, you'll thank me later." Scientifically, Glyptodon fascinates because it's a creature of paradoxes. It was both vulnerable and invincible, both ancient and adaptable. Its distant cousins, the armadillos, still carry echoes of its design, tiny reminders of a time when their lineage was colossal. The structure of its shell tells stories in bone, how each plate grew with the animal, how the armor healed when damaged, how evolution found elegance in geometry. Even its tail club, which looks like pure aggression, was balanced by restraint. It didn't attack often. It didn't need to. The threat was enough. If you stood beside one, you'd feel its presence before you understood it. The ground might tremble faintly. The air would carry a faint grassy musk. Its small head would turn toward you, dark eyes blinking under a low brow, and it would regard you not as a threat or a friend, but as something irrelevant to its slow purpose. Then it would go back to grazing, leaving you there with a strange feeling, some mixture of awe, amusement, and a quiet lesson in how to live deliberately. In a way, Glyptodon's story is less about extinction and more about endurance. It reminds us that survival isn't always about cleverness or speed. Sometimes it's about constancy, about finding a way of being that works and sticking to it for millions of years. It may not have been glamorous, but it was effective, until of course the world changed, and slow patience was no longer enough. Even now, when paleontologists unearth a Glyptodon shell from riverbanks or quarries, the bones seem to hum with memory. They speak of a time when the world was filled with strange shapes and slower rhythms, when survival was measured in persistence rather than progress. The shell, smooth and cold, still fits perfectly together, like a puzzle that never forgot how to be whole. Glyptodon may be gone, but it left behind a kind of wisdom carved in its very bones. That strength doesn't need speed, and armor isn't just protection, it's patience, solidified. So if you ever find yourself walking across a quiet plain, where the wind moves low through the grass and the earth feels ancient under your feet, imagine it, a round shadow rolling through the mist, the faint clink of armor plates, a tail sweeping like a pendulum, the great armored beast, unhurried and unafraid, grazing beneath the sun. Glyptodon, 3 meters long, 5,000 kilograms of calm defiance. The gentle tank of South America, a creature that lived by one rule only: move slow, eat grass, fear nothing. And in that philosophy perhaps it understood something we've forgotten, that to endure is, in its own quiet way, the greatest kind of victory. Irish elk, the giant deer of Europe. In the soft dawn of an ice age morning, the mist hangs low over a grassy plain that stretches from Ireland to the farthest edges of Europe. The air smells of frost and wild thyme, and in the silence there comes a sound like branches brushing against the sky, a deep rustling, rhythmic and proud. Through the fog emerges a silhouette both elegant and absurdly magnificent. A great deer, taller than a man, crowned with antlers that seem to hold the sunrise itself. This is Megalochus ros giganteus, better known as the Irish elk, the largest deer ever to have lived. A creature that looked as if the earth itself had decided to take the concept of majestic and see how far it could go before physics complained. To start with the numbers, because they always impress, this ancient deer stood up to 2.1 meters tall at the shoulder, weighed around 500 kilograms, and carried antlers that could stretch 3.6 meters across from tip to tip. That's about the width of a small car. Each antler could weigh up to 40 kilograms, which is roughly equivalent to strapping a full-sized sofa to your head and then deciding to go for a sprint. And yet somehow the Irish elk made it work with grace, poise, and a kind of reckless grandeur that makes evolution look like an artist showing off. Despite its name, the Irish elk wasn't exclusively Irish, and it wasn't an elk. The name stuck because the best preserved fossils were found in Ireland's bogs, their bones stained dark and beautiful by centuries of peat. In truth, this giant deer ranged across much of Europe, northern Asia, and even parts of Siberia, wandering through forests, tundra, and grassy plains. It was a cosmopolitan creature of the Ice Age, as comfortable in the cold as it was in the stories of awestruck humans who later discovered its remains. The antlers, of course, steal the show. It's impossible not to wonder, why so big? Nature, ever the tinkerer, doesn't waste energy without reason. Scientists believe those sprawling antlers weren't just decorative, they were tools of both display and combat. During mating season, males likely used them to signal strength and vitality to females, much like modern deer do with smaller racks. But they also clashed, literally, with one another, locking horns in thunderous battles for dominance. You can picture the scene: two giants facing each other on a misty meadow, heads lowered, muscles trembling. The air vibrates with the tension of ancient instinct. Then they charge. If evolution ever had a sense of humor, it must have chuckled while designing this creature. Those enormous antlers were both magnificent and mildly impractical. In dense forests, An Irish elk would have had to move with great care or risk getting stuck in the trees like an overly ambitious chandelier. But in open plains, where visibility and spectacle mattered most, the size made perfect sense. The Ice Age landscapes of Europe were often vast, grassy, and dotted with low shrubs, ideal for showing off. In that environment, bigger antlers meant better chances of attracting mates, and so generation after generation they grew wider and grander, until the deer of Europe became walking monuments to the excesses of sexual selection. Its body, too, was built for performance. The Irish elk was leaner and longer-limbed than modern moose or red deer. Despite its size, it could run fast, probably reaching speeds close to 50 kilometers per hour when spooked. Its powerful legs and strong heart allowed it to cover long distances across open land in search of food and mates. If it wanted to, it could probably outrun a predator, though more often it relied on vigilance and sheer size to avoid trouble. Few Ice Age carnivores wanted to take on half a ton of muscle with a pair of razor-edged bone paddles attached to its head. For all its grandeur, the Irish elk was, at heart, a grazer. It fed mostly on grasses, herbs, and shoots, favoring open environments where such plants thrived. Fossilized teeth show wear patterns similar to those of modern grazers, with flattened surfaces perfect for grinding tough vegetation. But evolution, as generous as it can be, is never sentimental. For all their splendor, the Irish elk were living on borrowed time. Around 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to wane. Forests spread where once there had been open steppe. The lush grasses that sustained these animals grew scarcer, replaced by trees and shrubs ill-suited to their diet. Suddenly, those magnificent antlers, so perfect for impressing mates on open plains, became liabilities in crowded woodlands. It's hard to strut elegantly when your headgear keeps snagging on branches. And then, of course, came humans. By the time the first people reached northern Europe, the Irish elk was already struggling. The warming climate was reshaping its habitat, but human hunting likely delivered the final push. To hungry hunter-gatherers, a 500-kilogram deer would have been a prize beyond measure. Meat, hide, bone, all in one elegant, if slightly unwieldy package. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans encountered and hunted them, though probably not to extinction single-handedly. The real culprit was the slow squeeze of environment and time, the shrinking of the spaces where giants could still live. The last known populations of Irish elk lingered in Siberia, their range retreating ever eastward until, around 7,000 years ago, they disappeared completely. To put that in perspective, the Great Pyramids of Egypt were still thousands of years in the future. Civilization hadn't yet begun, but already the world had lost one of its most magnificent children. And yet, the Irish elk never truly left us. Its fossils, often found in astonishingly good condition in Ireland's bogs, captured the imagination of scientists and poets alike. When 18th century naturalists first unearthed those colossal antlers, they were baffled. Some thought they must belong to a giant moose. Others wondered if they were the remains of a biblical monster. When Charles Darwin later examined them, he saw in their shape and size the perfect example of natural selection's eccentric artistry, beauty pushed to its biological limits. There's something both tragic and endearing about the Irish elk's design. Its antlers, the very symbol of its majesty, may also have been its downfall. Carrying them demanded huge amounts of calcium and phosphorus, which the body had to draw from bones during growth. In times of scarcity, that strain could have weakened individuals, making them less likely to survive. It's as though evolution, in a moment of extravagance, overplayed its hand, creating a creature too splendid, too specialized for a changing world. Still, it's hard not to admire it. The Irish elk was nature's declaration that even in an age of mammoths and saber-toothed, grace mattered as much as size. It was strength expressed through symmetry, beauty born from struggle. You can almost picture one standing in the twilight of prehistory, framed by the last light of an Ice Age sun, its antlers catching the sky like a cathedral's arches. And perhaps there's humor in it, too. One can imagine young male Irish elk competing not just for mates, but for space. Two giants trying to walk through a narrow stand of trees and realizing too late that their antlers have interlocked. A bit of awkward thrashing, a snort, maybe an embarrassed grunt, and then back to grazing, dignity restored. Even giants, it seems, have their clumsy moments. In life, the Irish elk would have been a creature of presence, quiet but commanding. In death, it became a creature of legend. The vast antlers found in Irish peat bogs gave rise to local tales of mystical stags and forgotten gods. To medieval minds, these weren't animals, but relics of a lost age, proof that giants had once walked the earth. In a sense, they were right. Today, when you see one reconstructed in a museum, you can't help but pause. The bones rise before you, delicate yet vast, the antlers sweeping outward in an impossible arc. There's a stillness in them, a kind of frozen motion as though the animal might step forward at any moment and shake the dust from its horns. The Irish elk reminds us that evolution doesn't always seek balance. Sometimes it reaches for grandeur. Sometimes it builds cathedrals from bone and ambition and lets them stand until the environment changes the rules. Its extinction isn't just a story of loss. It's a reminder that beauty and survival don't always walk the same path. Still, if you stand on a misty morning somewhere in the Irish countryside, where the grass glows with dew and the fog rolls over ancient fields, it's easy to imagine that echo of movement, the whisper of hooves, the ghostly brush of antlers against low clouds, the earth remembering. The Irish elk, 3.5 meters of antlers, half a ton of strength, the last and greatest of the giant deer, a creature that ran fast, fought fiercely, and carried the sky on its head. And perhaps if the wind is kind, you might still hear it murmuring through the meadows. Grow tall, run free, let the forest remember your crown. Mammoths, the woolly giants of the north. The wind sweeps across a frozen plain that stretches farther than the eye can see, painting ripples in the snow like brushstrokes on a canvas of silence. The air is sharp and clean, the kind that bites your lungs but makes you feel alive. And then, faint at first, comes a sound, the deep, resonant vibration of footsteps heavy enough to shake the earth. Out of the blowing snow, enormous shadows take shape. Curved tusks gleam in the pale sunlight, sweeping in elegant arcs, and from head to foot they are covered in shaggy, russet-brown fur that ripples with every step. The giants of the Ice Age have arrived. This is the world of the mammoths, the long-haired, frost-born cousins of our modern elephants, and perhaps the most beloved of all extinct creatures to ever walk the earth. For over 500,000 years, mammoths ruled the cold northern hemisphere, from Europe and Siberia to the tundras of North America. The most famous of them, the woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius, stood up to 4 meters tall, weighed nearly 6 tons, and carried tusks so long they could curve back and almost touch its body. Imagine an elephant, but dressed for an eternal winter, a creature built for endurance, strength and quiet nobility, striding through a frozen world where survival was a daily art form. It's easy to romanticize them, and perhaps that's why we do. With their woolly coats, wise eyes, and patient expressions, mammoths seem like symbols of resilience, gentle titans who belonged equally to myth and biology. Yet behind that calm grandeur was a masterpiece of adaptation. Every detail of their bodies told a story of ice, wind, and evolution's ingenuity. Their fur, for instance, wasn't just long, it was layered. A dense undercoat of fine wool trapped heat close to the skin, while a longer outer layer, up to 1 meter in length, shielded them from the Arctic winds. Beneath that fur was a layer of fat up to 10 centimeters thick, functioning like natural insulation. Their small ears reduced heat loss, their tails were short to avoid frostbite, and even their blood had evolved to circulate oxygen efficiently at low temperatures. If there was ever a creature designed for the cold, it was the mammoth. And then there were the tusks, those magnificent spiraling arcs of ivory that could grow more than 3 meters long. They weren't just ornaments. Mammoths used them to dig through snow to reach buried grasses, to spar with rivals during mating season, and to defend themselves from predators. Each tusk recorded the story of a mammoth's life, growing in annual layers like the rings of a tree, capturing years of hunger, abundance, migration, and even injury. In the curves of those ancient tusks, scientists can read not only the age of a single animal, but the rhythm of the Ice Age itself. But mammoths were more than solitary wanderers. They lived in herds, much like elephants today, led by matriarchs, wise females who remembered roots, rivers, and seasonal feeding grounds. Across vast tundras and steppe, these herds migrated with the seasons, following the greening of the land as snow retreated and returned. The air would have been filled with their deep rumbling calls, infrasonic messages traveling across miles, bonding the group together. Calves walked under their mothers' bellies for warmth, while the elders guided them safely through blizzards and across frozen rivers. There's something profoundly comforting about that image. Enormous families moving together through a harsh world, their every breath a small defiance against extinction. Their diet was humble but abundant. Mammoths were grazers, feeding primarily on grasses, sedges, and herbs that grew in the so-called Mammoth Steppe, a vast biome that stretched from Spain to Alaska, teeming with life despite the cold. It was one of the richest ecosystems ever known, sustained by the steady rhythms of cold and thaw. Each mammoth could consume up to 80 kilograms of vegetation a day, a moving lawnmower powered by ancient sunlight. You can picture them in the twilight of an Arctic summer, their shaggy forms glowing golden in the long light, sweeping their trunks across the ground to gather grass and flowers. For tens of thousands of years they flourished, and then, very gradually, the world began to change. Around 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to end. The climate warmed, glaciers retreated, forests began to spread across the once open grasslands. The Mammoth Steppe, the vast cold prairie that had been their kingdom, was breaking apart. The food that once stretched endlessly across the horizon became patchy and scarce. The giants who had thrived in cold and wind now faced a world of trees and mud, where heat replaced frost, and the rhythm of the land no longer suited their slow, migratory way of life. And as if that weren't enough, a new and clever predator had arrived: humans. We don't know exactly how the relationship began. Perhaps at first, early humans watched mammoths from a distance with awe, seeing in them both danger and opportunity. The mammoth was a walking storehouse of survival: meat, fat, bone, hide, and ivory. For the people of the Ice Age, hunting one could sustain an entire tribe for weeks. Soon humans learned to cooperate in the hunt, driving mammoths into traps or using spears tipped with flint to bring them down. But even then, humans respected them. We carved their likenesses into bone and ivory, etched their curved forms on the walls of caves in France and Siberia. To ancient artists, the mammoth was not just food, it was sacred, a symbol of power, endurance, and the eternal struggle against the cold. When you look at those cave paintings now, the lines are soft but certain, the trunks raised as if in greeting. You can almost feel the reverence in each stroke. Still, reverence didn't stop extinction. As the world warmed, mammoth populations dwindled. Smaller and smaller groups survived in isolated pockets, across the Siberian tundra, in Alaska, and finally on tiny islands in the Arctic Ocean. The last known population lived on Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, surviving until around 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Egypt were built, long after mammoths had vanished from the mainland. Imagine that. While humans were building civilizations, a few dozen woolly mammoths still walked under the Arctic stars, unaware that they were the final chapter of their kind. Their extinction was quiet, not sudden. It wasn't an asteroid or a volcanic cataclysm. It was the slow tightening of the world around them. Warmer air, shrinking food, rising seas, and the relentless persistence of human hunters. Evolution had given them everything they needed for the cold, but nothing for a changing climate. Still, mammoths refuse to fade entirely from our imagination. They linger in myths and memories, in frozen bones and stories passed down through generations. Their remains, preserved in permafrost, are so well kept that scientists have found entire bodies, fur intact, eyes still recognizable, stomachs full of half-digested grass. It's as if the earth herself has been keeping them safe, waiting for us to rediscover them. And rediscover them, we have. In the modern age, the mammoth has become a kind of scientific obsession. Geneticists have extracted DNA from frozen specimens, comparing it to that of modern elephants, and the results are astonishing. They're over 99% genetically identical. There are even serious projects exploring the idea of bringing them back, reviving the mammoth, or at least creating a hybrid using Asian elephants as surrogates. The thought of shaggy herds once again roaming the Siberian tundra captures something deep in our imagination, a longing for the wildness we've lost. But perhaps it's enough to remember them, to imagine them as they were. A herd moving through a snowstorm, their shapes vast but gentle. The matriarch leading with slow determination, calves nestled between the legs of the adults, the air filled with the low hum of communication. Frost clings to their fur, the aurora dances faintly above. The earth seems to hold its breath for them. And yet, for all their majesty, they were also endearingly clumsy. Their tusks sometimes grew so long that they had to tilt their heads to graze. Their heavy coats gathered ice that needed shaking loose, and when summer came, you can imagine them wallowing in mud pools to cool off, trunks flinging globs of wet earth into the air, like mischievous children. For all their grandeur, they were living, breathing, imperfect creatures, funny, awkward, and somehow familiar. Perhaps that's why the mammoth still feels close to us. They weren't monsters of a distant alien world. They lived alongside our ancestors. They walked the same landscapes, shared the same challenges, and in a sense, shaped. Their bones were used to build shelters, their tusks carved into tools, their images etched into our first art. They were part of the story of humanity long before history began. If you stand in a museum today, before the towering skeleton of a woolly mammoth, you can almost feel the echo of that ancient connection. The bones are enormous, yes, but they also feel familiar, like family. You look up at the great curving tusks, the domed skull, the powerful limbs, and you realize this was not a relic of some lost fantasy world. It was one of us, a fellow traveler through time, caught in the same dance of survival and change. The earth remembers them still. In Siberia, the frozen soil occasionally gives one back. A mammoth calf with soft fur and a peaceful face as if merely sleeping. People gather, scientists measure, photographers gasp. For a moment the ice age breathes again, and maybe, in some distant corner of the Arctic night, the wind still carries a faint echo, the deep steady rumble of footsteps through snow. Mammoths walking across the endless white, heads held high, tusks gleaming in the pale light of a world that once belonged to them. They were 4 meters tall, 6 tons of warmth and will, their fur woven from cold and sunlight. They ate grass, followed the seasons, crossed continents. They survived glaciers and storms, only to vanish when the ice melted away. But even now, when the air grows cold and the stars shimmer like frost, you can almost hear the earth whispering their ancient creed. Walk on. The snow is not your enemy. The cold remembers your name. Stella's sea cow, the giant of the cold Pacific. Imagine the northern Pacific Ocean in the 18th century, vast, grey and untamed. The water swells with cold life, its surface broken by the rhythmic breath of whales and the sleek backs of seals. Kelp forests sway beneath the waves like green cathedrals reaching up from the seafloor toward the filtered light above. And among these forests moves a creature so large, so gentle, and so improbable, that sailors upon first seeing it might have mistaken it for a drifting island. This was Stella's sea cow, Hydrodamulus gigas, a marine giant, 9 meters long, and weighing nearly 10 tons, a peaceful herbivore that glided through the icy waters near the Commander Islands, grazing endlessly on seaweed, unaware that its time on Earth would be heartbreakingly brief. It is one of those stories that feels both ancient and modern, mythic yet painfully real. The Stella's sea cow lived not in the deep past of mammoths and saber-toothed cats, but in a time of maps and muskets, of explorers and ships with names. When the German naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller first described it in 1741, the animal had already been reduced to a few scattered populations in the cold reaches of the Bering Sea, near the rugged coasts between Russia and Alaska. Within just 27 years, it would vanish forever. But before it disappeared, it was magnificent. Picture it, a creature resembling an enormous manatee, its skin dark and wrinkled, more like the bark of an old tree than the sleek hide of a dolphin. Beneath that rough texture lay a layer of blubber, nearly 10 centimeters thick, an insulating armor against the freezing waters. Its body was shaped like a teardrop, broad and heavy in the middle, tapering toward a wide, paddle-like tail that propelled it slowly but powerfully through the kelp forests. Its head was small for its size, with a blunt snout and gentle eyes that gave it an expression of sleepy curiosity. Instead of teeth, it had keratin plates, perfect for grinding up coarse seaweed. Stella described them as extraordinarily slow and clumsy, yet also strangely noble, moving with a quiet rhythm that matched the sway of the seaweed they ate. They spent their days grazing on kelp, particularly the giant brown species that form dense undersea jungles along the Pacific coast. They would pull up whole fronds, chewing methodically, the sound of their feeding echoing faintly underwater like distant thunder. They were social creatures too. Stella wrote that they lived in small family groups, mothers, fathers, and calves swimming together in tight formation. When one was injured or killed, the others would linger, nudging the body gently, as if in mourning. It's a detail that catches in the heart, a reminder that intelligence and emotion aren't limited to land-bound creatures or those with hands. Unlike their smaller relatives, the dugongs and manatees that still inhabit warmer seas, Stella's sea cows had traded agility for size. In the predator-rich waters of the North Pacific, sheer mass was their shield. 10 tons of bulk and a thick hide made them nearly impervious to natural threats. No shark or orca wanted to tangle with a creature that large, not when faster, easier prey swam nearby. For millennia, their only real competition came from ice, storms, and the slow grind of evolution itself. And for a long while, that was enough. But then came the humans. When the expedition led by Danish explorer Vitus Bering and Stella was shipwrecked on what would later be called Bering Island, the stranded crew discovered these strange animals along the shore. They were an unexpected blessing in a place where hunger stalked every day. The men quickly realized that sea cow's meat was not only edible, but delicious, sweet, tender, and marbled with fat that stayed fresh for months. The blubber burned cleanly as lamp oil, the hide could be used for boat coverings, and the bones served as tools. For the desperate sailors, this gentle giant became salvation. Stella, ever the scientist, observed as much as he mourned. He described how the sea cows floated near the surface, browsing calmly, unafraid of humans. They were slow swimmers, unable to dive deeply, and so large that they could barely submerge completely. When one was harpooned, it didn't flee, it merely struggled, often with its family circling helplessly nearby. The ocean would turn red, the air filled with the hollow bellows of a dying creature that had never learned to fear us. It's a haunting image, an animal so perfectly adapted to a peaceful niche, so large it needed no defense, meeting a species for whom no size, no armor, no innocence offers protection. Within a few years of Stella's report, hunters from Russia began visiting the islands in search of sea cow meat and hides. The animals were easy to kill, each one yielding a bounty of resources, but they reproduced slowly. Females gave birth to just one calf every few years, and they couldn't flee beyond their narrow range. By 1768, scarcely 3 decades after science had named them, the last known Stella's sea cow was dead. The Pacific grew quieter, and the kelp forests lost one of their oldest residents. It's almost impossible to believe that an animal so large, so tangible, could vanish so quickly. A single human lifetime spanned its discovery and extinction. If extinction had a sound, perhaps it would be the slow hush of waves against a beach, once crowded with giants. And yet, imagining them alive again, it's hard not to smile. Despite their size, there was something almost comical about their appearance. A marine behemoth with the demeanor of a lazy cow and the face of a slightly confused walrus. You can picture one surfacing with a loud, wet snort, blinking water from its eyes, and looking faintly surprised that the world contains anything smaller than itself. Oh, it might seem to say, "You're new," then it would return to its meal, unbothered. They were, in a way, the ocean's slow gardeners. By grazing on kelp, they kept the underwater forest trimmed and healthy, preventing overgrowth that could choke out other species. Every movement of their tails stirred the seafloor, releasing nutrients that fed plankton and fish. Their lives were quiet acts of balance, the kind that sustain entire ecosystems without ever drawing attention. And there's something poetic about their place in time. Stella's sea cow was the last survivor of a lineage that once spanned oceans, a family of giant herbivorous sirenians that had lived for millions of years, long before humans walked upright. Their ancestors had grazed in warm tropical seas, but as the world cooled, some adapted to the north, evolving thicker skins and greater bulk to withstand the cold. They were the slow pulse of the planet's memory, drifting through ages of ice and salt. In the end, they met the same fate as so many gentle giants. They trusted too much, moved too slowly, and crossed paths with us. But unlike the mammoths or saber-toothed cats, their extinction happened under observation. We watched it, recorded it, and even named it after the man who first tried to understand them. It's one of the earliest documented extinctions caused directly by humans, a sobering milestone in our long, complicated relationship with the natural world. If we could step back in time, just a few centuries, not millennia, we might find them again, along the kelp-lined shores of the Command Islands. The water would be cold and clear, the air would smell of salt and ire, and beneath the waves you'd see the slow, graceful movement of massive shapes drifting between strands of golden kelp. A calf would nudge its mother, learning to graze. Sunlight would shimmer on their backs. The sea would hum with life. And then, if you stood quietly, you'd hear the soft sigh of their breathing, a rhythm older than history itself. They say the ocean forgets nothing. Its depths hold the bones of empires and the whispers of everything that has ever lived. Somewhere down there, beneath centuries of silt and silence, the remains of the last sea cows still rest. Ribs like curved beams, skulls like pale anchors. The water moves through them gently, carrying the faint echo of what once was. We can't help but wonder what they would make of the world now. If somehow they returned, would they still float through the cold Pacific, unafraid, grazing on kelp as ships and submarines passed overhead? Would they recognize the sound of humans? Not the crack of harpoons this time, but the hum of engines, the flicker of cameras, the click of oar. Maybe they would rise to the surface, blink at us once, and return to their quiet business, as if to say, "Don't worry, the ocean has seen worse." There's a strange, bittersweet humor in their story, the idea of a creature so enormous, so serene, undone not by nature but by hunger and curiosity. It's as if the earth whispered to them, "Grow large, grow peaceful, you will need nothing but the sea," and they believed her, right until the moment we arrived. Still, they left behind more than bones. They left a lesson. In their brief appearance in human history, they reminded us that discovery is not ownership, and that the act of naming something does not make it ours to take. If you close your eyes now and listen to the waves, you might imagine them returning, the slow rise of a massive back through the foam, the gentle flick of a paddle-shaped tail, the glint of sunlight on wet, wrinkled skin. You might hear a deep, contented sigh, as if the sea itself were breathing. Stella's sea cow, 9 meters long, 10 tons of gentleness, the last giant of the cold Pacific, a creature that needed nothing but kelp and quiet to survive, and lost both to us. And if the earth still whispers through the tides, perhaps you can catch the echo of its voice, soft and amused. Swim slow, eat well, beware the curious ones on shore. Giants, as Earth's engineers, the forgotten architects of life. The earth has always been a builder. Mountains rise and crumble, rivers carve their signatures through stone, and forests weave green cathedrals from sunlight. Yet, for millions of years, it wasn't only wind and water shaping the planet. It was life itself. Enormous, lumbering, thundering life. Across continents and seas, the giants of prehistory worked quietly as the planet's first engineers, sculpting ecosystems not with machines or blueprints, but with footsteps, appetites, and instincts. They were the architects of balance, the movers of mountains made of grass, the silent caretakers of the earth before we ever learned to stand upright. It's easy, when thinking of extinct megafauna, to picture only their size, their massive bones in museum halls, their images looming in documentaries, their names whispered like legends. But beneath the grandeur lies something subtler and more profound. Their function, a giant, from forest to sea, played a role in the living machinery of Earth, a role that was as crucial as rain or sunlight. They weren't just inhabitants, they were the gears that kept the planet's systems turning. Imagine, for a moment, a dense tropical forest, long before human hands touched it. The trees tower close together, vines clutching their trunks like green veins. And there, pushing through the undergrowth, comes a shadow so vast that branches sway and birds scatter from the canopy. A giant herbivore moves with slow patience, its sheer weight bending saplings, snapping branches, opening light and air where none existed before. In its wake, sunlight pours down to the forest floor, igniting the seeds that had lain waiting in the dark. In the great orchestra of nature, this creature isn't just an audience, it's the conductor. With every movement, it shapes the composition of the forest, deciding which trees will thrive and which will yield to light. Now shift the scene to the open grasslands, where winds sweep endlessly across oceans of green. Here the balance is delicate. Too much vegetation, and the plains choke. Too little, and the soil dies. Enter the giant predators and fleet-footed herbivores who once ruled these spaces, maintaining equilibrium through the rhythm of chase and flight. Their presence kept grazers from overfeeding and allowed grass to regrow. Their migrations stirred nutrients through the soil. The land was alive, not only because of the grass, but because of the footsteps upon it. Each stampede was a heartbeat of the ecosystem. In the deserts and savannas, massive reptiles once prowled, their heavy tails drawing furrows in the sand. They hunted the large and the strong, ensuring that no species grew beyond its bounds. Balance wasn't peace, it was motion, tension, and release. The death of one gave life to many. The remains of the fallen became food for scavengers, who in turn kept disease from festering. Even decay was part of the design, a cycle of cleanup and renewal performed without pause or plan, yet with perfect efficiency. Further north, in lands of frost and tundra, great beasts once roamed beneath skies of pale fire. They carried the cold like armor and shaped the frozen steppe with every journey. Their migrations carved ancient highways across the land, trails that guided rivers and herds alike. Their grazing kept the grasslands open, preventing forests from smothering the plains. Their feet compacted the snow, keeping permafrost cold enough to persist through summer. They were gardeners of the Ice Age, maintaining meadows of frozen beauty through sheer momentum. Without their wandering, the land would have suffocated beneath its own stillness. And beneath the oceans, the giants of the deep worked in their own quiet harmony. Massive herbivores glided through kelp forests, trimming the seaweed that might otherwise grow unchecked. Each mouthful kept light streaming to the seabed, allowing smaller plants and creatures to flourish. In their absence, the ocean floor would have become a tangled mass of overgrown life, a suffocating jungle of silence. These marine gardeners were as vital to the ocean's health as coral reefs or currents. Taken together, these giants were the architects of flow. They mixed the ingredients of life the way a chef stirs a simmering stew, turning soil, spreading seeds, fertilizing land, recycling death into nourishment. Every footprint became a seedbed, every fallen body a garden. They pulled down trees, opened skylights in the canopy, and carved ponds where rain could gather. They dug burrows that breathed fresh air into the ground, creating homes for smaller creatures who in turn spread fungi, pollinated flowers, and returned nutrients to the soil. The earth's surface was their canvas, and they painted with patience. And the funny thing is, none of this was intentional. They weren't trying to cultivate balance or beauty. They were simply living, eating, walking, sleeping, and through those ordinary acts, performing miracles of ecology. That's the secret of the Earth's design. Harmony isn't planned. It emerges. The giants were, in essence, ecosystem engineers by accident. Their clumsiness was creation, their hunger restoration, their laziness preservation. Think of the towering herbivores who flattened forests, not out of malice, but convenience. Their daily browsing made room for new life. Think of the great predators whose hunts maintained the dance between prey and vegetation. Think of the scavengers who turned rot into renewal, whose appetites kept the world clean. Think of the burrowers who ventilated the soil, or the grazers who spread the seeds of their meals across continents. None of them knew their purpose, and yet together they kept the planet breathing. Modern scientists call this trophic regulation and ecological engineering, but those are just clinical terms for what the Earth has always done: use life to shape life. Where giants walked, diversity followed. Where they vanished, silence crept in. Because what happens when the engineers disappear? Without the forest clearers, undergrowth thickens until light can't reach the ground. Without the grazers, grasslands choke and dry, turning into desert. Without the scavengers, disease festers. Without the predators, balance falters, and prey devour the very world that sustains them. Even the soil itself remembers. The compacted earth softens, water stagnates, seeds no longer travel, the living web slackens. It's tempting to think of extinction as a single moment, a creature taking its last breath somewhere far away. But extinction ripples. When one species vanishes, the world shifts subtly around it. Paths disappear, forests thicken, rivers change course. The rhythm falters, and sometimes it takes centuries for the echo of that loss to fade. In that sense, the giants never truly died alone. Their absence rewrote the landscapes they once tended. The earth they left behind grew quieter, smaller, more predictable. And while new species took their place, nimble, clever, efficient, something of the planet's grandeur was lost with them. The world became tidier, but less alive. Yet even in absence, the giants left fingerprints everywhere. Fossilized trails still cross the tundras they once roamed. Ancient burrows remain beneath the soil, now filled with air and light. In the DNA of plants, there are clues to the animals that once carried their seeds. Plants that still rely on dispersal methods, their partners no longer provide. Kelp forests remember their gardeners, growing too thick now that no great mouths come to trim them. Grasslands remember the weight of migrating feet and grow differently in places where those feet once passed. The earth, it seems, still misses their touch, but there's hope hidden in that memory, because ecosystems, like stories, are never truly finished. In some places, modern animals have taken up the roles of the ancients. Elephants open forests the way their prehistoric cousins once did, tearing down trees so grass and shrubs can thrive. Bison and caribou shape northern plains through their migrations, trampling paths that echo those of the long-gone wanderers. Sea otters trim kelp where the great grazers once fed. Even humans, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes purposefully, have begun to act as stewards, reintroducing balance to places long out of tune. The earth doesn't mourn the past in sorrow, it folds it into the present, as compost feeds new roots. The giant's legacy lives on, not in bone or myth, but in the living systems that still carry their rhythm. They were the planet's first landscapers, the first architects of beauty born from necessity. They remind us that scale matters, that life to thrive must move, disturb, and renew. And perhaps there's something humorous, almost humbling, in realizing that the planet's grandest engineers didn't need blueprints. They didn't calculate or debate or design. They just existed, and in doing so built worlds, a sloth dragging down a tree, a horned beast carving paths through frost, a giant fish trimming kelp. They were all unknowingly sculpting the earth into its most vibrant form. We often think of giants as symbols of excess, too big, too clumsy, destined to fail. But maybe they were teachers instead. Maybe they showed the earth how to breathe, and now it's up to us to remember the lesson, to move gently but deliberately, to make space for others, to live in a way that builds rather than consumes. If you listen closely to the hum of the wind across grasslands, to the sigh of the sea through the kelp, to the rustle of forests at dawn, you might still hear them. The giant's work continues in every leaf that grows where sunlight once fell through a gap they opened, in every trail that winds where their feet once pressed the ground. The earth whispers still, "Thank you, old friends," because long before cities and engines, before roads and rivers had names, the planet was already alive with design. It was sculpted not by tools, but by the quiet labor of giants, creatures whose simple acts of living built the world beneath our feet. And perhaps, if we have any wisdom at all, we'll remember what they taught us, that to shape the earth well, one doesn't need force or precision, just presence, patience, and the will to belong. And so, our journey through deep time draws to a close. The long winds of the Pleistocene fall quiet, and the echoes of great footsteps fade into the soft hum of the present. From the forests where ancient giants once walked to the cold seas where immense forms drifted beneath the waves, The world has whispered its stories to us, stories of strength and silence, of survival and loss. Once, the earth was a cathedral of giants, from towering apes that moved through green labyrinths of forest, to feathered hunters thundering across sunlit plains, from reptilian titans guarding the deserts, to mammoths trudging through snowfields of endless white, from slow, armored grazers to turry ocean wanderers grazing on kelp. The planet pulsed with life on a grand scale. Each of them played a part in the old symphony of balance. Each of them left a mark, not only in the rocks beneath our feet, but in the memory of the earth itself. But nothing, not even the mighty, lasts forever. The ice began to melt. The air grew warmer. The forests shifted. The seas rose. The rhythms that had guided life for millions of years changed their tempo. Some of the giants were undone by climate, by the slow, invisible hand of a planet turning its own page. Others met a quicker fate, falling to the cleverness of a new species that carried fire and tools and curiosity in its hand. It was not cruelty, perhaps, but hunger and necessity. Still, one by one, the giants vanished. The Pleistocene ended not with a roar, but with a long exhale, the quiet settling of dust after the age of enormity had passed. Yet, their story isn't one of tragedy alone. It is a lesson, whispered gently through the layers of time. It tells us that even the greatest lives, those that could topple trees or cross oceans, rest on fragile foundations. The balance that sustains the mighty is the same balance that sustains the small. The warmth of the sun that melts the ice for one creature can drown the home of another. Life in all its vastness depends on a thin thread of harmony, and perhaps that's the true legacy of the Pleistocene, not the bones we unearth, nor the reconstructions in glass museums, but the reminder that greatness and vulnerability are twins. Every life, no matter how monumental, moves at the mercy of change. The giants remind us that power without balance, endurance without adaptation, can only last so long. Still, when we look around today, the forests, the plains, the seas, we can feel them in the elephants that migrate beneath African skies, in the slow sway of kelp forests, in the persistence of life that refuses to stop building, breathing, and adapting. The earth never truly loses what it loves, it transforms it. The giants may have gone, but their memory became the soil, the ocean, and the wind. So, as you rest now, picture them not as ghosts, but as the foundation beneath everything alive. The forgotten engineers, the quiet caretakers, the dreamers of an age before ours. Their world was colder, wilder, and older than memory, but it was also ours in spirit. The story they left is written in every breath we take. The Pleistocene was their time, and yet in a way it is still part of ours. A long heartbeat in the history of Earth, reminding us that all things, even the mighty, must live gently or fade. And maybe tonight, as you drift towards sleep, the wind outside your window carries a whisper from that ancient world. Remember us, live wisely, walk softly. If you've enjoyed this journey through the age of forgotten giants, share your thoughts, your wonder, your dreams of that old Earth where fur and frost ruled the horizon. Like, subscribe, and let your imagination wander back into that vast, quiet world where the snow glowed under starlight and the earth still trembled under the weight of giants. Sleep well, traveller of time. Dream of wool and tusk, of feather and frost, of a world immense and breathing. The Pleistocene still lingers in the hush of the night, waiting, patient, eternal.